Hello, friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The frozen Alaska highway stretched endlessly before Jasper's 18-wheeler as he navigated through the darkness of an early December morning. At 53, he'd been hauling freight across Alaska's most remote territories for nearly 3 decades, but this particular run had him on edge from the moment he'd accepted it. The dispatch order had come through his company system 2 days earlier with unusually specific instructions and a payment rate that was nearly triple the standard fee. The cargo itself wasn't remarkable, just basic supplies and building materials bound for a private residence deep in the wilderness, approximately 140 miles northwest of Fairbanks. What made it unusual was the delivery location. In all his years driving these routes, Jasper had never been asked to deliver to a residence that far off the main transportation corridors. The coordinates led to a property that, according to his GPS, sat at the end of a logging road that hadn't been actively maintained in over a decade. Jasper had called dispatch to verify the order wasn't a mistake. The response from his supervisor had been curt and oddly defensive. The client specifically requested an experienced driver familiar with difficult terrain, and they're paying premium rates for discretion and promptness. The supervisor had paused before adding something that stuck with Jasper. "They asked for you by name, said you delivered to them before, though I can't find any record of it in our system." That detail had bothered Jasper more than he cared to admit. He prided himself on remembering every delivery, every client, every treacherous turn in the road. But he had no recollection of delivering to these coordinates or dealing with a client named Ezra Blackwood, the name on the manifest. Still, the money was too good to pass up, especially with his daughter's college tuition payment coming due. The temperature gauge on his dashboard read -37 degrees Fahrenheit as he turned off the Alaska highway onto the abandoned logging road. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow corridor between towering black spruce trees heavy with snow. The road, if it could still be called that, was barely wide enough for his rig. Branches scraped against the sides of his trailer, creating an eerie symphony that set his nerves further on edge. According to his GPS, he had another 23 miles to go, but the device seemed confused, repeatedly recalculating as if the road he was on didn't exist in its database. The radio had long since turned to static, and his cell phone showed no signal bars. He was truly alone out here, further from civilization than he'd been in years. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, during which he'd averaged less than 15 miles per hour, Jasper finally saw lights through the trees ahead. As he drew closer, a structure emerged from the darkness that made him involuntarily ease off the accelerator. The cabin, though that seemed too modest a word for it, was far larger than he'd expected. It was a sprawling log construction that looked decades old, with multiple additions jutting off at odd angles, as if the building had grown organically over time. What struck him most wasn't the size, but the condition. Despite its apparent age, every window glowed with warm light, and smoke rose from 3 separate chimneys. For a residence this remote, it showed signs of significant habitation and resources. A diesel generator hummed somewhere nearby, and Jasper noticed several satellite dishes mounted on the roof, their surfaces cleared of snow. He pulled his rig into what appeared to be a loading area, a cleared space that seemed too perfectly sized for his truck, as if it had been specifically prepared for this delivery. As he set the parking brake and prepared to exit the cab, movement in one of the cabin's windows caught his eye. A figure stood there, motionless, watching him. Even from a distance, Jasper could tell the person was unusually tall and thin. The cabin's front door opened before Jasper could climb down from his cab. The man who emerged matched the figure he'd seen in the window. Ezra Blackwood, Jasper presumed, stood at least 6.5 feet tall, but couldn't have weighed more than 160 pounds. His gaunt frame was accentuated by the old-fashioned clothing he wore, dark wool trousers with suspenders over a white shirt that looked like it belonged in a museum. His face was all sharp angles, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that reflected the porch light like a nocturnal animal's. "Jasper," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the cold air. "Right on schedule. I do appreciate punctuality." There was something unsettling about how he said Jasper's name, a familiarity that didn't match the fact they'd never met. Jasper grabbed the manifest clipboard and climbed down from the cab, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Mr. Blackwood?" Jasper kept his tone professional despite his growing discomfort. "I've got your delivery. Where would you like me to unload?" Ezra's thin lips pulled back in what might have been intended as a smile, but looked more like a grimace. "Please, call me Ezra. We're too far from civilization for such formalities." He gestured toward a large, barn-like structure Jasper hadn't noticed initially, set back among the trees. "Everything goes in there. But first, you must be cold. Come inside, warm yourself. Prudence has prepared something hot to drink." Every instinct Jasper had developed over 30 years of driving told him to politely decline, unload quickly, and get back on the road. But there was something in Ezra's tone, not quite threatening but certainly expecting compliance, that made refusal seem inadvisable. Besides, his hands were already growing numb despite his insulated gloves. "Just for a moment," Jasper agreed, following Ezra toward the cabin. The interior was even more unusual than the exterior had suggested. The main room was expansive, with ceilings that stretched up 2 stories. Animal heads mounted on the walls, but not the typical Alaskan game. These were things Jasper couldn't immediately identify, with antlers that twisted in impossible directions and faces that seemed almost human in their expressions. The furniture was all handmade, heavy wooden pieces that looked centuries old. But it was the smell that made Jasper's stomach turn. Beneath the wood smoke and pine, there was something else, something organic and wrong, like meat that had been left out too long but not quite long enough to completely rot. "Prudence," Ezra called out. "Our guest has arrived." A woman emerged from what Jasper assumed was the kitchen. Where Ezra was tall and gaunt, Prudence was short and round, but there was something equally unsettling about her appearance. Her face was almost perfectly circular, with small features clustered in the center as if someone had pressed them there as an afterthought. She wore a long dress that might have been fashionable in the 1890s, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that stretched her skin tight across her skull. "You must be tired from your journey," she said, her voice high and childlike despite her apparent middle age. Sit. I'll bring you something warm." Before Jasper could protest, she had disappeared back into the kitchen. Ezra gestured to a chair near the fireplace, and Jasper reluctantly sat, keeping his jacket on. "You don't remember us, do you?" Ezra asked, settling into a chair across from him. "I'm sorry?" Jasper was caught off guard by the question. "Your previous delivery. 3 years ago. Different company then, weren't you? Mitchell Freight Lines, I believe." Jasper felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He had worked for Mitchell Freight, but that was over 5 years ago, and the company had gone bankrupt after a series of drivers had disappeared on remote routes. He'd never made any deliveries this far off the grid for them. "I think you must be mistaken," Jasper said carefully. "This is my first time out here." Ezra's smile widened, revealing teeth that were perfectly white but somehow wrong in their uniformity, like dentures that didn't quite fit. "Memory can be such a fragile thing, especially after trauma. But no matter. You're here now, and that's what's important." Prudence returned with a steaming mug that she pressed into Jasper's hands before he could refuse. The liquid inside was dark and had an herbal smell he couldn't identify. He pretended to take a sip, letting the warm ceramic heat his hands while avoiding actually drinking. "I should really get to unloading," Jasper said, starting to stand. "It's a long drive back, and the weather—" "Nonsense," Ezra interrupted. "The weather will hold for a few more hours. Besides, we need to discuss the special items." "Special items?" Jasper checked his manifest. "Everything I have is on this list. Building supplies, canned goods, fuel. Yes, the official cargo." Ezra waved dismissively. "But surely you brought the other things, the items we specifically requested when we asked for you." Jasper's confusion must have shown on his face because Prudence made a tutting sound. "He really doesn't remember, Ezra. Perhaps we should help him." "In time," Ezra replied, his eyes never leaving Jasper's face. "First, let's get the truck unloaded. The barn is climate-controlled, so your goods will be safe there." Relieved to have an excuse to leave the oppressive atmosphere of the cabin, Jasper stood quickly, setting the untouched mug on a side table. "I'll back the trailer up to the barn." "I'll open the doors for you," Ezra said, rising with a fluid motion that seemed impossible for someone so tall and thin. "Prudence, perhaps you should prepare the guest room. I have a feeling Jasper will be staying longer than he expects." "I can't stay," Jasper said firmly. "Company policy. I need to be back in Fairbanks by—" "Company policy," Ezra repeated, seeming to find the phrase amusing. "Tell me, Jasper, does your company policy account for roads that become impassable? For weather that turns without warning? For the fact that you're 140 miles from the nearest help?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jasper's hand instinctively moved toward the pocket where he kept his phone, though he knew it was useless without signal. "The road was fine on the way in," Jasper said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Was it?" Ezra asked. "Are you certain? These old logging roads can be treacherous. Bridges that look stable can collapse without warning. Trees that have stood for decades can suddenly fall, blocking the only way out. So many things can go wrong in the wilderness." Jasper understood perfectly. He was being told, not asked, that he would be staying. The question was why, and more importantly, how he was going to get out of this situation. "Let me get the truck unloaded," he said, buying time to think. "Then we can discuss whatever you need to discuss." Ezra's smile returned, all those perfect wrong teeth on display. "Excellent. Prudence, I think our guest is beginning to remember his manners." As Jasper walked back to his truck, he heard Prudence's high, childlike voice behind him. "Should I prepare the special room, Ezra?" "Not yet," Ezra replied. "Let's see if his memory improves first." Jasper climbed into his cab and started the engine, his mind racing. He needed to unload the cargo, that much was clear. But he also needed to find a way to signal for help or, failing that, get back on the road before whatever Ezra and Prudence had planned came to fruition. As he backed the trailer toward the barn, he noticed something he'd missed on arrival. There were other tire tracks in the snow, multiple sets, all leading to the barn but none leading away. The barn doors swung open, revealing an interior that was far more modern than the rustic exterior suggested. LED lights illuminated a space filled with industrial shelving, refrigeration units, and what looked like medical equipment covered in white sheets. But it was what he saw in the far corner that made his blood run cold. 3 trucks, all different makes and models, all with company logos he recognized. Mitchell Freight Lines, Northern Transport, Arctic Hauling. All companies that had lost drivers on remote routes over the past 5 years. "Quite a collection, isn't it?" Ezra's voice came from directly behind him, impossibly close. Jasper hadn't heard him approach. "Some drivers are so forgetful they leave their vehicles behind. We take good care of them, of course. Waste not, want not." Jasper's hand moved to the gear shift, calculating if he could simply drive away, cargo and all. But Ezra's hand, cold even through Jasper's jacket, landed on his shoulder. Now, Ezra said softly. Let's not be hasty. You haven't even seen what we really need delivered. You see, Jasper, you're not here to bring us supplies. You're here because you are the supply. Before Jasper could react, something sharp pricked his neck. The world tilted, colors bleeding together like watercolors in rain. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Prudence standing in the barn doorway, holding a syringe and wearing that same unsettling smile. "Welcome home, Jasper," she said in her little girl voice. "We've been waiting so long for you to come back." Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up through thick, dark water. Jasper's first sensation was cold, a deep, bone-aching cold that told him he'd been unconscious for some time. His second was the realization that he couldn't move his arms or legs. As his vision cleared, he found himself in what appeared to be a medical examination room, strapped to a metal table that had been tilted at a 45-degree angle so he was neither fully lying nor standing. The room was disturbingly clean, with white tile walls that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. Medical equipment lined the walls, some of it modern, some looking like it belonged in a World War II field hospital. The smell of disinfectant was overwhelming, but underneath it was that same organic wrongness he'd noticed in the main cabin. "Ah, you're awake." Ezra entered through a door Jasper hadn't noticed, now wearing what looked like a doctor's coat from another era, complete with a high collar and buttons up to his throat. "Prudence was worried she'd given you too much sedative. She does get enthusiastic sometimes." "What do you want?" Jasper's voice came out as a croak. His throat was parched. "What do we want?" Ezra seemed to consider the question as he moved to one of the equipment tables, his long fingers dancing over various instruments. "That's both simple and complex. On the surface, we want what everyone wants, to survive. But survival out here, so far from the corrupting influence of modern civilization, requires certain adaptations." He turned back to Jasper, holding what looked like an antique blood pressure cuff. "You truly don't remember your last visit, do you? Fascinating. The human mind's ability to suppress trauma is remarkable." "I've never been here before," Jasper insisted, though even as he said it, something nagged at the back of his mind. A fragment of memory, like a word on the tip of his tongue. "Mitchell Freight Lines," Ezra said slowly, wrapping the cuff around Jasper's arm. "October 15, 3 years ago. You were delivering medical supplies to the Innoko River Research Station. But there was an early storm, wasn't there? You had to seek shelter." As Ezra spoke, images flashed through Jasper's mind. Snow falling so thick he couldn't see. His truck sliding off the road, lights in the distance, a couple offering warm food and shelter. But then, nothing. The next thing he remembered was waking up in his truck on the side of the highway, nearly frozen to death, with no memory of how he'd gotten there. "The authorities said you were lucky," Ezra continued, pumping the blood pressure cuff. "Hypothermia-induced amnesia, they called it. But we knew better. We knew you'd come back. They always do, the ones who get away." "Get away from what?" Jasper asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The door opened and Prudence entered, wheeling a cart with what looked like IV equipment. She'd changed into a nurse's uniform that was decades out of style, complete with a small cap pinned to her bun. "From the selection process, of course," she said in her childlike voice. "Not everyone is suitable for our needs. Some are too weak, some too strong. But you, Jasper, you were perfect. That's why we marked you." "Marked me?" Jasper struggled against the restraints, but they held firm. Ezra produced a small pen light and shone it in Jasper's eyes, studying his pupils with clinical detachment. "Show him, Prudence." She wheeled over a standing mirror, positioning it so Jasper could see himself. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just his own frightened face staring back. Then Prudence produced a black light, and when she held it up to his reflection, Jasper gasped. There were symbols on his forehead, invisible in normal light but glowing a sickly green under the ultraviolet. They looked like some kind of runic script, but nothing he recognized. "We marked you 3 years ago," Ezra explained. "A special compound that bonds with the skin cells. Invisible, permanent, and most importantly, it ensures you can never truly leave. Part of you always remains here, calling you back." The transformed drivers moved with an unnatural synchronization, circling Jasper's tilted examination table like predators evaluating prey. Their faces, when caught in the harsh fluorescent light, showed signs of their alteration. Veins, visible beneath translucent skin, pulsed with a dark fluid that clearly wasn't blood. Their eyes had taken on a yellowish tinge, and when they breathed, wisps of vapor emerged, even though the room wasn't cold enough for breath to be visible. "You don't remember us, do you?" the tallest one asked. Jasper recognized him now from a missing poster at the Fairbanks truck stop. Dale Morrison, independent contractor, missing for 8 months. "We remember you. You were here when they brought me in. You were in the next room, screaming." The memory hit Jasper like a physical blow. Not his last visit 3 years ago, but something else, something his mind had desperately tried to bury. He had been here before, maybe multiple times. How many memories had he lost? How many times had they caught him and let him go? "The process affects memory," another driver said, and Jasper identified him as Carl Young, who'd disappeared 6 months ago hauling petrochemicals. "Each time they treat you, each time you resist, you lose pieces of yourself. We stopped resisting." "Better to serve than to be consumed," the third added. This one Jasper didn't recognize, but the faded logo on his shirt suggested he'd been one of the Mitchell freight drivers. "Serve?" Jasper tested the restraints again, but they held firm. The burning in his veins had subsided to a dull ache, but he could feel something changing inside him. Cells restructuring, DNA rewriting itself according to some alien template. "They need us functional," Dale explained. "We maintain the equipment, process the new arrivals, handle disposal of the unsuccessful subjects. In exchange, we get to keep existing, even if we're not entirely human anymore." "Enough chatting," Ezra's voice came through an intercom Jasper hadn't noticed. "Begin the preparation for Phase 2. The 3 drivers moved to various machines around the room, their movements mechanical, programmed. Carl wheeled over an apparatus that looked like a dialysis machine crossed with something from a medieval torture chamber. Tubes ending in needles of varying sizes hung from its frame like tentacles. "This won't be pleasant," Dale said, and for a moment Jasper caught a glimpse of humanity in his altered eyes, a flash of sympathy or perhaps shared suffering. "But if you survive it, the pain stops. Everything stops. The fear, the cold, the hunger. You become something else, something that doesn't need those human weaknesses anymore." "I'd rather die," Jasper said through gritted teeth. "That's what I said too," Carl replied, preparing the needles. "That's what we all said. But when you're facing actual death, when you feel your organs shutting down and your brain firing its last neurons, survival instinct takes over. You'll beg for the transformation. We all did." The door opened and Prudence entered carrying a tray of vials filled with various colored liquids. Up close, Jasper could see that she too had been altered, though more subtly than the drivers. Her skin had a waxy quality, and her movements were too precise, too perfect, like a machine imitating human motion. "His blood work shows remarkable compatibility," she announced in her childlike voice. "Even better than 3 years ago. The repeated exposure has actually improved his candidacy." "Excellent," Ezra's voice crackled through the intercom. Proceed with the extraction. Start with the spinal fluid. We need to replenish our reserves before we attempt the full transformation. Jasper felt panic rising as Carl positioned one of the larger needles at the base of his spine. Wait, please. You don't have to do this. People will come looking for me. The company has GPS tracking on all their trucks now. Your truck's GPS shows you arriving safely at Innoko River Station 2 hours ago, Prudence said, preparing a syringe. You even checked in with dispatch, reporting successful delivery and beginning your return journey. Technology is wonderful when you know how to manipulate it. The needle entered his spine, and Jasper screamed. The pain was beyond description, not just physical but existential, as if something fundamental to his being was being drained away. Through the haze of agony, he heard the machine humming, saw vials filling with a clear fluid that sparkled with an unnatural luminescence. Remarkable, Prudence breathed. The quality is even better than we hoped. This single extraction could sustain us for months. But we won't stop at one, Ezra's voice said. He can regenerate now that the first phase is complete. We can harvest from him indefinitely, as long as we're careful not to take too much at once. Through tears of pain, Jasper saw Dale lean closer. There is another way, he whispered, so quietly the others couldn't hear. But you have to trust me. Before Jasper could respond, Dale straightened and announced loudly, The extraction is going well, but his vitals are spiking. We should pause before his system goes into shock. Prudence checked the monitors. He's right. His heart rate is approaching dangerous levels. We'll give him an hour to stabilize, then continue. She injected something into Jasper's IV line, and the pain began to recede, replaced by a strange, floating sensation. The room grew dim as the 3 drivers filed out, followed by Prudence, but Dale lingered for a moment at the door. When they come back, pretend to be weaker than you are, he whispered. The restraints have a manual override under the table. I loosened it earlier. You'll have maybe 30 seconds before they realize you're free. Then he was gone, leaving Jasper alone with his thoughts and the steady beep of the monitoring equipment. He tried to process what Dale had said. Was it genuine help or another trap? At this point, did it matter? Any chance was better than none. Moving carefully to avoid triggering any alarms, Jasper felt under the table with his fingers. There it was, a lever just within reach if he strained. He could feel that it had indeed been loosened, requiring less force to activate than it should. Time crawled by. The drugs in his system made everything feel distant and dreamlike, but he fought to stay alert. Through the small window in the door, he could see shadows moving in the hallway beyond. They were preparing something. He could hear metallic clinks and electronic beeps. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, he heard footsteps approaching. Multiple sets. They were coming back. Jasper forced his breathing to slow, let his body go limp, half-closed his eyes. He needed to appear barely conscious. The door opened. Ezra entered first, no longer in his doctor's coat, but wearing what looked like a hazmat suit. Prudence followed, similarly attired, wheeling in a gurney with restraints. The transformation accelerates from here, Ezra was saying to someone behind him. Once we complete the neural integration, he'll be fully ours. A new figure entered, someone Jasper hadn't seen before. Another woman, elderly, moving with the careful precision of extreme age. But her eyes were sharp, alert, and when she looked at Jasper, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. This is the one who escaped before? She asked, her voice carrying an authority that even Ezra deferred to. Yes, Mother, Ezra replied. But we've corrected the protocols. He won't escape again. Mother. Jasper filed that information away. There was a hierarchy here, and this woman was at the top. He's strong, the old woman observed, studying Jasper like a specimen. The strong ones always try to escape. It's what makes them valuable. Their will to survive ensures the quality of what we harvest. She moved closer, reaching out with one gnarled hand to touch Jasper's forehead. Her skin was ice-cold and had a texture like leather. "Can you hear me, driver?" she asked. "I know the drugs haven't completely suppressed your consciousness. I can see it in your eyes, that spark of defiance. Good. It makes the braking so much more satisfying." Jasper remained still, though every instinct screamed at him to recoil from her touch. "Ezra, Prudence, prepare the neural interface," she commanded. "I'll oversee this one personally. It's been too long since we've had a subject with this much potential." As they busied themselves with equipment, the old woman leaned close to Jasper's ear. "You want to know a secret?" she whispered. "We don't need to do any of this. The transformation, the harvesting, it's all just ritual now. We found another way to survive decades ago. But old habits die hard, and there's something satisfying about breaking strong men like you. It's the only entertainment we have out here in our self-imposed exile." The revelation hit Jasper harder than any physical blow. They were torturing him for sport, not survival. The anger that erupted gave him the strength he needed. As Ezra and Prudence wheeled over the neural interface, a terrifying helmet covered in electrodes and needles, Jasper made his move. His fingers found the manual override and pulled. The restraints released with a pneumatic hiss. In one fluid motion, driven by adrenaline and desperation, he rolled off the table. Ezra lunged for him, but Jasper grabbed the IV stand and swung it like a club, catching the tall man across the face. The impact sent Ezra crashing into Prudence, both of them tumbling into the equipment. The old woman didn't move, didn't even seem surprised. She simply watched with those sharp eyes as Jasper backed toward the door. "You won't get far," she said calmly. "The compound in your blood, it's temperature sensitive. The moment you go outside into that cold, it will crystallize. The pain will be excruciating. You'll be begging to come back within minutes." Jasper's hand was on the door handle. "I'll take my chances." "Even if you reach your truck, it won't start," she continued. "Even if by some miracle it does, the road is blocked. We made sure of that after you arrived. Trees down in 3 places, too heavy for one man to move. Then I'll walk." She laughed, a sound like wind through a cemetery. 40 miles to the nearest inhabited area, in minus 40-degree weather, with a blood chemistry that will make every step agony. You'll be dead in 2 miles. Behind her, Ezra was getting to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. Prudence was reaching for something in her pocket, probably a sedative. Jasper had seconds to decide. That's when he saw Dale in the hallway behind them, holding what looked like a flare gun. Their eyes met, and Dale nodded almost imperceptibly. "You're right," Jasper said to the old woman, letting his shoulders slump in defeat. "I can't escape, but I can make sure you don't get what you want from me." He yanked open the door and ran. Behind him, he heard shouting, footsteps, but also something else. The distinctive whistle of a flare being fired. The hallway filled with brilliant red light and acrid smoke. Dale had given him cover. Jasper ran through corridors he didn't remember, following some instinct or buried memory. The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, with sections that seemed to extend underground. He passed rooms filled with medical equipment, storage areas stacked with supplies that could sustain a small army, and other doors he didn't have time to investigate. The cold hit him the moment he burst through an exit door into the Arctic night. The old woman had been right about one thing. The compound in his blood reacted immediately to the temperature change. It felt like thousands of needles were being driven into every nerve ending simultaneously. But Jasper had been through worse now. The memory of that needle in his spine drove him forward. His truck sat where he'd left it, covered in a thin layer of fresh snow. He climbed into the cab, grateful he'd left the keys in the ignition, an old habit from routes where getting locked out could mean death. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing to life with a reluctance that suggested it had been tampered with but not completely disabled. Through the windshield, he could see figures emerging from the cabin. Ezra, Prudence, the three transformed drivers, and the old woman, standing in the doorway like a specter. Jasper threw the truck into gear and started forward, then stopped. He couldn't leave the cargo, evidence of his presence here. But more importantly, he'd seen those other trucks in the barn. There might be evidence in them, something that could lead authorities back here. Making a decision that went against every survival instinct, he turned the truck toward the barn instead of the road. The massive doors were still open from earlier. He gunned the engine, building speed, and aimed directly for the structure. The impact was tremendous. His truck plowed through the abandoned vehicles, shoving them aside like toys. The momentum carried him straight through the back wall of the barn, wood and metal exploding outward in a shower of debris. Beyond the barn was the forest, and beyond that, if his memory of the maps was correct, an old logging trail that connected to a different road, one they might not have blocked. It would be rough, maybe impossible for a truck this size, but it was his only chance. In his mirrors, he could see flames beginning to engulf the barn. Something he'd hit must have ruptured a fuel line. Good. Let it all burn. Let someone see the smoke and investigate. The truck bounced and scraped through the forest, branches shattering against the windshield, tires struggling for purchase in the deep snow. Every impact sent new waves of pain through his system as the compound in his blood continued its crystallization process. Behind him, he could hear engines starting. They were coming after him. But he had a head start, and more importantly, he had 30 years of experience driving in conditions that would stop most people. The old logging trail appeared like a miracle, barely visible under the snow, but definitely there. He turned onto it, the truck fishtailing dangerously before finding traction. In his mirrors, headlights were weaving through the trees, getting closer. That's when he saw the first fallen tree blocking the road, a massive spruce lying across the trail like a barricade. But Jasper had dealt with obstacles before. He downshifted, building torque, and aimed for the root end where the trunk was elevated slightly off the ground. The impact nearly stopped the truck, but the momentum and weight of the loaded trailer carried him over. The undercarriage scraped horribly, and he could hear air hissing from damaged brake lines, but he was through. 2 more obstacles appeared and were conquered the same way, each taking its toll on the truck. By the time he reached the intersection with the main logging road, the engine was overheating, the brakes were barely functional, and at least 2 tires were shredded. But he could see lights in the distance, not the pursuing vehicles, but the steady glow of the highway. He'd made it to a different road, one they hadn't expected him to know about. As he limped onto the paved surface, he grabbed his CB radio, finding an emergency channel. "Mayday, mayday. This is Truck 774 Heavy. I need immediate assistance. Multiple hostiles in pursuit. GPS coordinates." He rattled off his location, then added something that would guarantee a response. "Possible human trafficking situation. Multiple victims at the following coordinates." He gave the location of the cabin, then repeated the message twice more before the radio died, another casualty of the damage to his truck. In his mirrors, he could see the pursuit vehicles had stopped at the edge of the forest, unwilling to follow him onto the public highway where they might be seen. He'd won this round, but as the adrenaline faded and the pain from the crystallizing compound intensified, he wondered at what cost. Miles later, as red and blue lights finally appeared in the distance, Jasper allowed himself to slump over the steering wheel. He was alive. He was free. But the marks on his skin, invisible to normal sight, were still there. And now he knew the truth. They would always be there, calling him back. As state troopers surrounded his truck and paramedics rushed to assist him, Jasper made a silent vow. He would make sure authorities found that cabin, make sure Ezra, Prudence, and especially the old woman, faced justice. But even as he made this promise, he could hear her voice in his head, carried on the wind that whistled through his damaged truck. "You'll be back, Jasper. They always come back. And next time, we'll be ready for you." The paramedic asking him questions looked concerned as Jasper started laughing, a sound with too much hysteria and not enough humor. How could he explain that he'd escaped from something that shouldn't exist, from people who weren't quite people anymore, from a fate worse than death but disguised as salvation? How could he explain that even now, safe and surrounded by help, he could feel the pull northward, feel the marks on his skin tingling with promise and threat? He couldn't. So he simply closed his eyes and let the paramedics do their work, trying not to think about the fact that in the 3 years since his first escape, he'd forgotten everything until it was almost too late. What would he forget this time? And how long before they called him back again? The Alaska State Trooper Station in Fairbanks was not equipped for the story Jasper told them. He sat in an interview room, wrapped in a thermal blanket, watching Detective Sarah Chen's expression grow increasingly skeptical as he described the cabin, the transformed drivers, and the old woman who seemed to orchestrate it all. "Mr. Holbrook," the detective said, using the false surname from the ID he carried for emergencies. Jasper hadn't corrected her, some instinct telling him to keep his real identity protected. "You've been through severe trauma. The medical team found high levels of unknown substances in your bloodstream. Is it possible that what you experienced was hallucinations?" Jasper finished for her. "That's what you think, that I was drugged and imagined it all. The coordinates you provided led to an abandoned mining camp that's been deserted for 20 years. Chen said gently. "No cabin, no barn, no evidence of recent habitation, just old equipment and collapsed structures." Jasper stared at her, his mind racing. They'd moved. Somehow, in the hours between his escape and the arrival of law enforcement, they'd vanished. Or perhaps the coordinates had been wrong, scrambled by the drugs in his system or deliberately altered by the compound affecting his brain. "The tracks," he said desperately. "My truck left tracks. The damage to it, that's real. You can't fake that." "We're not disputing that you crashed through something," Chen acknowledged, "but it could have been the old mining structures. The brain, under extreme stress and unknown chemicals, can construct elaborate narratives to make sense of trauma." She pushed a form across the table. "We'd like to keep you for observation for 72 hours. The substances in your blood are unlike anything our lab has seen. For your own safety, you want to commit me," Jasper said flatly. "Protective custody," Chen corrected. "Until we understand what you were exposed to." Jasper looked at the form, then at the mirror he knew concealed other officers watching. If he signed, he'd be trapped again, just in a different kind of cage. If he refused, they'd probably find another way to hold him. But there was something else, something he'd noticed when they'd brought him in. The desk sergeant who'd processed him had a small tattoo on his wrist, barely visible under his uniform sleeve. It was similar to one of the symbols he'd seen glowing on his own forehead under the black light. Not identical, but close enough to send a chill through his spine. "I need to make a phone call," Jasper said. "I have that right?" Chen nodded. "Of course." They led him to a phone in the hallway. Jasper dialed a number from memory, one he hadn't used in years. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Thompson?" "Red sky at morning," Jasper said quietly, using a code phrase from his military days. There was a long pause. "Jasper, Jesus Christ, where are you?" Marcus Thompson had served with Jasper in Afghanistan, both of them Army transport specialists before Jasper had gone into civilian trucking. More importantly, Marcus now worked for a private security firm that specialized in unusual situations. "Fairbanks State Trooper Station. I need an extraction. Possible infiltration at this location." "Understood. Sit tight." Legal counsel will be there within the hour. Jasper hung up and turned to find Chen watching him with narrowed eyes. Who did you call? My lawyer. Jasper lied smoothly. I'll wait for representation before signing anything. 45 minutes later, a woman in an expensive suit arrived, introducing herself as Amanda Richards from Richards & Associates. Jasper had never seen her before, but she knew the right phrases, mentioned Marcus by name, and, most importantly, she got him released. My client has committed no crime, she told Chen firmly. His blood tests show unknown substances, yes, but there's no evidence he took them willingly. He's the victim here, not a suspect. Unless you're charging him with something, we're leaving. Chen clearly wanted to object, but legally she had no grounds. As they walked out, Jasper noticed the desk sergeant watching them with unusual intensity. When their eyes met, the man's hand went unconsciously to his tattooed wrist. Richards led him to a black SUV with tinted windows. The moment they were inside, she handed him a bug detector. Sweep yourself. They might have tagged you. Jasper found 2 tracking devices, one in his boot heel, another sewn into the collar of the jacket they'd given him. Richards disposed of them out the window as they drove. Marcus filled me in on the basics, she said, navigating through Fairbanks traffic. You stumbled onto something big, didn't you? How much do you know about what's really out there? Jasper asked. In the remote parts of Alaska. More than most people would believe, Richards replied. My firm specializes in cases involving, let's call them anomalous situations. Things that don't fit neatly into conventional law enforcement paradigms. She pulled into a nondescript office building and led him to a secure room in the basement. Marcus Thompson was waiting, along with 2 other people Jasper didn't recognize. Good to see you alive, brother, Marcus said, embracing him briefly. When your emergency code came through our monitoring system, we feared the worst. How did you know to monitor me? Jasper asked. Marcus exchanged glances with the others. We've been tracking similar incidents for 3 years. Truckers going missing on remote routes, some found dead under mysterious circumstances, others never found at all. You're not the first to escape from something and have authorities dismiss their story. One of the strangers, a thin man with prematurely gray hair, introduced himself as Dr. James Wright. I'm a biochemist specializing in exotic compounds. I'd like to examine the substances in your blood with your permission. What you're describing sounds like a synthetic variation of something we've encountered before. Before? Jasper sat down heavily. This has happened before? Not exactly this, Wright said, pulling out a tablet. But similar situations. Isolated communities experimenting with biological enhancement, using travelers as test subjects or resources. Alaska's remoteness makes it a perfect laboratory for those who want to operate outside conventional oversight. The other stranger, a woman with sharp features and military bearing, introduced herself only as Singh. I run data analysis for the organization. The cabin you described doesn't appear on any current maps, but I found something interesting. She showed him satellite imagery on her laptop. This is the area from 6 months ago. See that heat bloom? Something was generating significant energy in what should be wilderness. But in yesterday's images, it's gone. They moved, Jasper said. They must have some way to relocate quickly. Or they were never physically there in the way you perceived, Wright suggested. The compounds in your blood show markers of powerful psychoactive properties. It's possible you were experiencing a shared hallucination, directed by someone who knew exactly what chemicals to use. The trucks were real, Jasper insisted. The missing drivers are real, Singh confirmed. Dale Morrison, Carl Young, 3 others from Mitchell Freight. All missing, all last seen on remote Alaskan routes. But here's what's interesting. She pulled up financial records. Large deposits were made to their accounts after they disappeared. Regular monthly payments from shell companies that trace back to dead ends. Payment for services, Marcus said grimly. They're not prisoners. They're employees. The revelation hit Jasper hard. But they were changed. Transformed. I saw them. You saw what you were meant to see, Wright said. The power of suggestion combined with targeted psychoactives can make people experience virtually anything. The question is why? What's the actual purpose? Richards, who had been quiet, finally spoke. There's something else. The desk sergeant at the station. The one with the tattoo. He's not the only one. We've identified similar markings on people throughout Alaska's law enforcement and transportation infrastructure. Small tattoos, always partially hidden, all variations of the same basic symbol. She showed Jasper a compilation of images, discrete photographs taken of various individuals. The tattoos were all slightly different, but clearly related, like variations on a theme. It's a network, Singh said. Whatever this is, it's not just one isolated cabin. It's organized, widespread, and has been operating for years. The old woman, Jasper said suddenly. She mentioned 47 years. They've been out there for 47 years. That aligns with something, Wright said, pulling up historical data. 47 years ago, there was a research project funded by private interests, studying the psychological effects of extreme isolation on small communities. The project was supposedly terminated after ethical violations, but the researchers disappeared. They were never found. Ezra and Prudence, Jasper said. They could be the researchers. Dr. Ezra Blackwood and Dr. Prudence Hawthorne, Singh confirmed, showing him old photographs. Despite the age of the images, the resemblance was unmistakable. Both brilliant, both obsessed with human enhancement and longevity. They were discredited after proposing human trials for their theories. So they went off the grid and continued their experiments, Marcus said, using truckers as subjects because we're perfect, Jasper finished. Isolated, often traveling alone, used to being out of contact for long periods. If we disappear, it takes time for anyone to notice, and even then, the assumption is usually accident or voluntary abandonment. The question is, Richard said, what do we do about it? Official channels won't believe this. We've seen that already. We need proof, Singh said. Real, undeniable evidence that can't be dismissed as hallucination or conspiracy theory. I might have that, Jasper said slowly. He pulled out his truck keys, which the police had returned to him. Attached was a small device he'd grabbed from the medical room during his escape, hardly aware he was doing it. I don't know what this is, but it came from their equipment. Wright took it carefully, examining it with obvious interest. This is sophisticated, very sophisticated. It appears to be some kind of biological monitoring device, but the technology is beyond current commercial or even military applications. Can you trace it? Marcus asked. Find out where it was manufactured? I can try, Wright said. But this is going to take time. Time we might not have, Jasper said. They know I escaped. They know I have knowledge of their operation. They'll either move completely or they'll come for you, Marcus finished. The marks on your skin, you said they were permanent? Jasper nodded. They said I'd always be drawn back, that I couldn't truly escape. Then we use that, Singh said suddenly. We turn their trap against them. You go back, but this time you're not alone. You're wired, tracked, and backed up by a full team. That's insane, Richard said. You're talking about using him as bait. I'm talking about ending this, Singh replied. How many more truckers have to disappear before someone takes action? Jasper thought about Dale Morrison, who had helped him escape despite his own transformation, about the other drivers who hadn't been so lucky, about all the ones who might be targeted in the future. I'll do it, he said. But not yet. First, we need to understand what we're really dealing with. Right? How long do you need to analyze that device and my blood samples? "72 hours minimum," Wright said. "Maybe less if I call in some favors." "Then we have 72 hours to prepare," Marcus said. "Singh, I want everything you can find on disappearances along remote routes. Focus on patterns, timing, anything that might predict their next move. Richards, we need legal frameworks ready in case we do find evidence, and Jasper, I need to remember," Jasper said. "Really remember. Not just the recent stuff, but everything. Every time I've been there, every detail I've suppressed." He looked at Wright. "Is there something you can give me to counteract whatever they used to block my memories?" Wright considered this. "Possibly. But recovering suppressed memories, especially traumatic ones, can be dangerous. You might not like what you remember." "I already don't like it," Jasper said. "But if we're going to stop them, I need the complete picture." As the team dispersed to their various tasks, Jasper remained in the secure room with Marcus. His old friend studied him with concern. "You sure about this? Going back?" "No," Jasper admitted. "But I keep thinking about what the old woman said. They don't really need to do what they're doing. They choose to. They enjoy it. How many people have suffered because of their games? And you think you can stop them?" "I think I have to try. Because here's the thing, Marcus. The marks on my skin, they're not just calling me back. They're getting stronger. I can feel it. Whatever they put in me, it's not done changing me. If we don't stop them soon, I might not be myself anymore." Marcus gripped his shoulder. "We won't let that happen." But as Jasper looked at his reflection in the dark window, he could swear he saw his features shifting slightly, becoming sharper, more angular, like Ezra's, like the transformed driver's. Time was running out, and the thing inside him was growing stronger. The question was whether they could stop Ezra, Prudence, and the old woman before Jasper became one of them permanently, and whether, when the time came to return to that cabin in the wilderness, he would still have enough humanity left to want to escape. Dr. Wright's laboratory was hidden in an industrial district on the outskirts of Anchorage, disguised as a chemical supply company. For 48 hours, Jasper had submitted to test after test, while Wright analyzed both his blood and the device he'd taken from the cabin. The results were disturbing beyond anything they'd anticipated. "The compound in your system isn't just altering you," Wright explained, showing Jasper a series of microscopic images. "It's rewriting your DNA in real time. Look at these samples taken 12 hours apart. Your cellular structure is changing at a rate that should be impossible." Jasper stared at the images, seeing cells that looked increasingly alien with each progressive sample. "How long before it's irreversible?" "Based on the progression rate, maybe another 72 hours, maybe less. The process seems to accelerate under stress." "And the device?" Wright held up the small instrument Jasper had grabbed. "It's a genetic sequencer, but far more advanced than anything publicly known. It's designed to monitor and guide genetic changes in real time. Whoever built this understood biological manipulation at a level that's decades ahead of current science." Singh entered the lab, her face grim. "We have a problem. 3 more truckers have gone missing in the last 2 days, all on remote routes within a 200-mile radius of Fairbanks. But here's the interesting part. They all had one thing in common." She showed them employment records. They all previously worked for companies that went bankrupt after losing drivers. Mitchell Freight, Northern Transport, Arctic Hauling. Someone's specifically targeting drivers with connections to previous disappearances. "They're cleaning house," Marcus said, joining them. "Eliminating witnesses or potential threats. Or recruiting," Jasper said quietly. "Dale Morrison helped me escape. Maybe others would too, given the chance. They need to replace the disloyal ones." Richards arrived with a folder of legal documents. "I've been investigating the financial angle. Those shell companies Singh found, They all trace back to research grants from the 1970s that were never officially terminated. Someone's been funding this operation with government money that technically doesn't exist. Black budget projects, Marcus said. Operations that were never officially approved but never officially canceled either. Jasper felt the marks on his skin beginning to burn. It had been getting worse over the past day, a constant low-level pain that spiked periodically. We're running out of time. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. The trap's ready, Singh said. We've identified the most likely location for their new base of operations. There's an abandoned research station about 80 miles northeast of where you escaped. Thermal imaging shows activity, and the power consumption for that area is way above what it should be. I'll need to approach alone, Jasper said. If they see a convoy, they'll scatter. Absolutely not, Marcus protested. You'll have backup. Hidden backup, Jasper clarified. I drive in alone, like I'm being called back. You follow at a distance. Once I'm inside and can confirm it's them, you move in. And if it's a trap? Richards asked. It's definitely a trap, Jasper said. The question is whether it's one we can turn against them. Wright handed him a small injector. This might help. It's a stabilizing compound I've developed based on my analysis. It won't stop your transformation, but it should slow it down and maybe, just maybe, give you enough clarity to resist their control. As they prepared for the operation, Jasper found himself thinking about the old woman's words. They didn't need to do this. They chose to. The cruelty was the point. The suffering was entertainment. How many truckers had died for their amusement? The next morning, Jasper was back in a truck, though not his own. This one was equipped with hidden cameras, tracking devices, and emergency communications equipment. He wore a wire so sophisticated it would be undetectable to all but the most advanced scanning equipment. The drive to the coordinates felt both endless and too quick. The marks on his skin burned constantly now, and he could feel something calling to him, a pull that grew stronger with each mile. By the time he reached the abandoned research station, he could barely resist the compulsion to simply walk inside and surrender. The station looked exactly as one would expect. Run-down buildings covered in decades of grime and snow. But Jasper could see the signs. Fresh tire tracks carefully obscured, windows that were too clean, smoke rising from what should be non-functional ventilation systems. He parked the truck and waited. They would come to him. They always did. He didn't have to wait long. The door to the main building opened, and Dale Morrison walked out. But it wasn't the transformed Dale from the cabin. This version looked entirely human, normal even, except for the way he moved. Too smooth, too precise. "Hello, Jasper," Dale said, his voice carrying clearly across the cold air. "We've been expecting you." Dale. Jasper climbed down from the cab, fighting the urge to run either toward or away from the building. "You helped me escape." "I helped you delay the inevitable," Dale corrected. "But you're here now, so it worked out as intended." "As intended?" Dale smiled, and it was genuinely sad. "You think you escaped because you're strong, but you escaped because she wanted you to. The old woman, she likes the ones who fight, makes the eventual surrender sweeter." "I'm not surrendering." "Aren't you? You're here, alone, again." Dale gestured to the building. "They're waiting inside, all of them, even some new faces you haven't met yet." Jasper activated the emergency signal, alerting his backup team. "I didn't come alone this time." Dale's expression didn't change. "We know. Your friends are about 15 minutes out. That's why we need to have this conversation now." Before Jasper could respond, the ground beneath his feet shifted. What he'd thought was solid permafrost was actually a camouflaged platform that tilted, sending him sliding into a concealed pit. He landed hard on a padded surface 10 feet down, the walls too smooth and high to climb. Dale's face appeared at the edge above. "I'm sorry, Jasper. I tried to warn you, but you didn't understand. This isn't about Ezra and Prudence. It never was. They're just the caretakers." "Caretakers of what?" "Of the thing that's been here long before any of us. The thing in the ground that changes people. They didn't discover it. It discovered them." The pad beneath Jasper began to descend, carrying him deeper underground. Emergency lights flickered on, revealing a shaft that seemed to go down forever. Dale's voice followed him down. "Your friends will find empty buildings. By the time they realize you're underground, you'll be too deep for their equipment to detect. And by the time they find this entrance, if they ever do, you'll be one of us." The descent continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the platform stopped in a vast underground chamber, clearly artificial but ancient, carved from the bedrock itself. The walls were covered in symbols similar to the marks on Jasper's skin, glowing with a faint phosphorescence. Ezra and Prudence were waiting, along with the old woman and a dozen others Jasper didn't recognize. All had the same slightly wrong appearance, like humans designed by something that didn't quite understand human proportions. "Welcome back, Jasper," the old woman said. "Or should I say, welcome home. This is where you were always meant to be." "What is this place?" Jasper demanded, though he could feel his resistance weakening. The marks on his skin were resonating with the symbols on the walls, creating a harmony that was almost pleasant. "This is where it lives," Prudence said in her childlike voice. "The thing that fell from the stars millennia ago. It's been waiting so patiently for the right kind of minds to shape, the right bodies to modify." "It's not malevolent," Ezra added. "It simply exists on a different scale than us. We're like cells to it, and it's trying to optimize us for purposes we can't fully comprehend." "But we get benefits," the old woman said. "Extended life, enhanced capabilities, freedom from human limitations. All it asks in return is that we bring it new genetic material to study." "The truckers," Jasper said, understanding finally dawning. "You're feeding truckers to an alien parasite." "Such crude terms," the old woman chided. "We're facilitating a symbiotic relationship. Some become part of the collective like us. Others provide raw material for its experiments. Either way, they serve a purpose greater than hauling cargo across frozen wastelands." Jasper felt his knees weakening. The compound in his blood was reacting to something in the air down here, accelerating the transformation. He could feel his thoughts becoming cloudy, his resistance crumbling. "Your friends are walking into the empty buildings now," Ezra reported, checking a device. "They're finding nothing. Soon they'll give up, assume you were delusional. Another trucker lost to the wilderness." "No," Jasper said, but his voice lacked conviction. The harmony between his marks and the walls was becoming overwhelming, like a song he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. That's when he remembered Wright's injector. With the last of his willpower, he pulled it from his pocket and pressed it against his neck. The stabilizing compound flooded his system, and suddenly the harmony became discord. The pleasant sensation turned to agony, but with it came clarity. "Interesting," the old woman observed. "You're still fighting. How delightful." But Jasper wasn't listening. The pain had cleared his mind enough to remember something crucial. The wire he was wearing wasn't just for audio. Wright had modified it with a special transmitter that could penetrate deep rock using a very specific frequency, one that would be triggered by the biological changes in his body reaching a critical mass. The transformation was his beacon. Above ground, 80 feet of rock and permafrost away, Singh's equipment suddenly lit up with a signal stronger than anything they'd expected. Not just Jasper's location, but a massive electromagnetic signature that indicated something far larger than a simple underground chamber. My God, Marcus said, looking at the readings. There's a whole complex down there. It's huge. Get drilling equipment, Singh commanded. And call in everyone. This isn't a rescue anymore. It's an excavation. Below, the old woman sensed something had changed. She studied Jasper with those sharp eyes, then smiled. Clever. You're broadcasting your transformation, using our own process against us. They'll find this place, Jasper said through gritted teeth. They'll stop you. Will they? She gestured to the walls, which were beginning to pulse with a different rhythm. This entity has existed for millennia. It's survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and the rise and fall of civilizations. Do you really think your little team of would-be heroes can stop it? The chamber began to shake, not from drilling but from something deeper. The entity was waking up, responding to the disruption of its careful orchestration. You have no idea what you've done, the old woman said, but for the first time Jasper heard fear in her voice. It's been dormant for decades, content to work through us. If it fully wakes... The symbols on the walls began to pulse faster, their glow intensifying. The transformed drivers started to convulse, their altered bodies responding to some unheard command. Even Ezra and Prudence looked disturbed, their usually controlled faces showing genuine alarm. We need to contain it, Ezra said urgently. The feeding protocols, quickly! But it was too late. The floor of the chamber cracked, and something began to emerge. Not a creature in any conventional sense, but a mass of tissue that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3. It hurt to look at directly, the mind refusing to process what the eyes were seeing. Jasper felt the marks on his skin burning with new intensity. The entity was trying to complete his transformation instantly, to make him part of itself before his friends could intervene. He fought back with everything he had, Wright's compound the only thing keeping him from being absorbed completely. Above, the drilling had begun. Marcus was coordinating with emergency services, though he'd been vague about what they were drilling toward. The cover story was a collapsed mine with trapped workers, close enough to the truth. 40 feet, Singh reported. But the rock is getting strange. It's almost organic in composition. Keep drilling, Marcus ordered, though he was beginning to understand they were dealing with something beyond their preparation. In the chamber, chaos reigned. The entity had partially emerged, revealing itself to be vast, possibly extending through miles of underground caverns. The old woman and her followers were trying to calm it, speaking in a language that predated human speech, but it was angry, disturbed by the intrusion from above. Dale Morrison, still partially human despite his transformation, grabbed Jasper's arm. The entity isn't evil, he said urgently. It's just alien. It doesn't understand that what it does hurts us. If it fully wakes, if it breaks containment, it won't just take a few truckers. It'll consume everything. Then help me stop it, Jasper said. Dale looked at the old woman, at Ezra and Prudence, all focused on their desperate ritual to calm the entity. Then he made his choice. There's a control mechanism, he said quickly. Something the original researchers installed as a failsafe. It's in the deep chamber, past the entity's main mass. If you can reach it, you can trigger a containment field that will force it back into dormancy. Why didn't you use it before? Because it would trap us all down here. The field doesn't discriminate. Anyone with the entity's mark would be contained too. Dale's expression was grim. That includes you now. Jasper looked at the pulsing mass of the entity, at the ceiling where he could hear drilling getting closer, at the marks on his skin that tied him to this thing. He thought of all the truckers who had disappeared, all the ones who might disappear if this continued. Show me the way. Dale led him around the edge of the chamber, staying as far from the entity's expanding mass as possible. The old woman noticed their movement and shrieked something in that pre-human language. Several of the transformed drivers moved to intercept them, but the entity's thrashing knocked them aside. Its attention focused on the drilling above. They reached a narrow passage cut into the rock, leading deeper still. The walls here were covered entirely in symbols, so dense they seemed to move and writhe. Jasper's marks resonated painfully with them, each step harder than the last. "I can't go further," Dale said, his own transformation making him vulnerable to the symbol's influence. "The control mechanism is at the end of this tunnel. It looks like a sphere of black glass. You need to place both hands on it and think about containment, about sleep, about peace. The entity will feel it and resist, but if you hold long enough, the failsafe will trigger. And I'll be trapped. Maybe. Or maybe your friends will find a way to free you once the entity is contained. Either way, it's better than the alternative." Jasper didn't hesitate. He pushed forward into the tunnel, each step agony as the symbols tried to rewrite his very existence. Behind him, he could hear the chamber collapsing, the entity's rage shaking the entire complex. The tunnel seemed endless. But finally, he reached a spherical chamber at its heart. In the center, exactly as Dale described, was a sphere of what looked like black glass, suspended in the air by forces Jasper couldn't comprehend. He reached for it, and immediately the entity's attention snapped to him. He could feel its vast intelligence pressing against his mind, trying to understand what he was doing, trying to stop him. The marks on his skin flared with heat that should have killed him, but Wright's compound kept him conscious, kept him human enough to remember why he was doing this. His hands touched the sphere, and instantly he understood. This wasn't human technology. This was something the entity itself had created eons ago, a way to regulate its own consciousness when it grew too large, too complex. The researchers had found it and learned to trigger it, but at a cost. Jasper thought about containment, about sleep, about peace. But more than that, he thought about the road, about the freedom of the highway, about the brotherhood of truckers who looked out for each other in the vast loneliness of Alaska's wilderness. He thought about human things, small things, things the entity couldn't understand but that made life worth living. The entity resisted, trying to pull him away, trying to complete his transformation. But Jasper held on, even as he felt his humanity slipping away, even as the marks spread across his entire body, even as his vision started to fade. Then, suddenly, silence. The entity retreated, pulling back into itself, returning to dormancy. The containment field activated, a barrier of energy that Jasper could feel rather than see, trapping everything marked by the entity within a specific radius, including him. In the main chamber, the drilling broke through just as the containment field solidified. Marcus and Singh rappelled down, followed by a full emergency team, to find a scene from a nightmare. The entity had retreated but left behind organic residue that defied description. The old woman and her followers were unconscious, contained within an energy field that sparked when approached. "Jasper!" Marcus called out. But there was no response. They found Dale Morrison at the entrance to the deep tunnel, unconscious but alive. When he woke, he told them what Jasper had done, where he'd gone, what he'd sacrificed. Singh's equipment could detect the containment field but couldn't penetrate it. Jasper was somewhere beyond it, alive according to the readings, but unreachable. "We'll find a way," Marcus vowed. "We'll get him out." But Wright, studying the readings, was less optimistic. "The field is tied to the entity itself. As long as it remains dormant, the field remains active. If we disable the field, the entity wakes up," Singh finished. They established a monitoring station at the site, officially designated as a hazardous materials containment facility. The old woman, Ezra, Prudence, and the other transformed individuals were kept in medical isolation, their conditions studied, but their freedom restricted. Dale Morrison, partially transformed but still retaining enough humanity to cooperate, became their primary source of information about the entity. He revealed that there were other sites, other places where the entity had touched the world, but this was the largest, the most active. Jasper saved more than just a few truckers. Dale said during one debriefing, if the entity had fully awakened, it would have spread. Every road, every connection between communities would have become a hunting ground. Months passed. The monitoring station remained active, constantly watching for any change in the containment field. Sometimes, late at night, the operators claimed they could hear something from deep below, not the entity, but something human, a voice perhaps calling out from the deep. They never stopped trying to find a solution, a way to free Jasper without releasing the entity. Wright worked tirelessly on understanding the compound in Jasper's blood, hoping to find a way to break the connection. Singh analyzed every piece of data, looking for patterns, weaknesses in the field. But Marcus knew the truth they all avoided speaking. Jasper had known what he was doing. He'd made the choice to protect others, even at the cost of his own freedom. It was the choice a good trucker would make, protecting fellow travelers on a dangerous road. The Alaska Highway continued to carry its endless stream of trucks, drivers passing by the innocuous facility without knowing what lay beneath. Sometimes, truckers would report strange dreams after driving that stretch of road, dreams of being underground, of marks that glowed in the dark, of a voice asking them to remember him. The company Jasper had worked for erected a small memorial at a rest stop near Fairbanks, a simple plaque that read, "For those who travel the long roads alone, remember you are never forgotten." Dale Morrison, freed from the entity's direct control but forever changed, took up trucking again. He drove the same routes Jasper had driven, keeping watch for signs of the entity's influence, for other sites where it might be stirring. He became part of an informal network of drivers who knew the truth, who watched the dark corners of Alaska's wilderness for things that shouldn't exist. And sometimes on very cold nights when the northern lights danced across the sky, drivers on the remotest stretches of highway claimed to see a figure standing by the road. A trucker, they said, still in his work clothes, watching the traffic pass. They said if you stopped and looked closely, you could see strange marks on his skin that glowed faintly in the darkness. But when they looked back, he was always gone, leaving only the sensation of being watched over, protected by someone who had chosen to stand guard in the space between the human world and something far older and stranger. The entity slept on, contained but not defeated, waiting with the patience of geological time. And Jasper waited with it, neither fully human nor fully transformed, suspended in a state that Wright theorized might last forever. But forever was a long time, and in the deepest part of the facility, in a chamber no one had yet discovered, something was happening. The black glass sphere that Jasper had touched was developing cracks, tiny fractures that grew by micrometers each year. The entity might be patient, but Jasper had something it didn't understand: human stubbornness, the same quality that had driven him to take one more load, drive one more mile, push through one more storm. He was still fighting, still pushing against the containment from the inside, still trying to find his way back to the road. And somewhere, in a truck stop in Fairbanks, Dale Morrison would sometimes raise his coffee cup in a silent toast to the empty chair across from him, honoring a friend who had saved them all, and promising that they hadn't forgotten, that they were still looking for a way to bring him home. The road, after all, never forgets its own. The storm hit the Dalton Highway without warning at 4 in the afternoon, turning the December daylight into an impenetrable wall of white. Orville Hutchins had been driving Alaska's ice roads for 22 years, but this blizzard was different. It came from nowhere, descended like a curtain, and within minutes had reduced visibility to less than 10 feet. At 58, Orville had seen enough weather to know when to stop pushing his luck. He eased his 18-wheeler to the shoulder, though in these conditions, the distinction between road and wilderness was purely theoretical. The wind howled against his cab with enough force to rock the entire rig, and the temperature gauge showed minus 43 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. He grabbed his radio, tuning to channel 19. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Oak northbound on the Dalton near mile marker 240. Got caught in this soup. Anyone else out here?" Static answered him. Then, faintly, a voice emerged from the white noise. "Big Oak, this is Frozen River, southbound near 235. This storm came out of nowhere. I'm pulled over too. Roads completely impassable." Orville recognized the handle. Jennifer, a younger driver he'd shared coffee with at the Coldfoot truck stop just yesterday. At least he wasn't alone out here. "Frozen River, Big Oak. Sit tight. This has to blow through eventually. Keep your engine running and your exhaust clear." "Copy that, Big Oak. Stay safe." Orville settled in for what he assumed would be a few hours of waiting. He had plenty of fuel, food, and water. The cab was warm, and he'd weathered worse storms, though usually with some warning. He pulled out his phone to check the weather forecast, but there was no signal. Not unusual this far north, but inconvenient. An hour passed. The storm didn't lessen. If anything, it intensified. The wind was now gusting hard enough that Orville could feel his truck sliding slightly on the ice despite being parked. He tried the radio again. "Frozen River, you still with me?" No response. He tried several more times, expanding his calls to any driver within range. Nothing but static. The radio wasn't broken. He could hear the faint background hum that indicated it was functioning. It was as if the storm had created a wall of interference around him. That's when he saw the lights. Through the swirling snow, two beams of light appeared, moving slowly along what must be the road. Another vehicle, thank God. Orville flashed his lights in response, the universal trucker signal of acknowledgement. The vehicle, which Orville could now make out as a heavy-duty pickup truck, pulled alongside his rig. A figure emerged, bundled so heavily against the cold that Orville couldn't make out any features. The person gestured toward Orville's cab. Orville cracked his window, immediately regretting it as the cold hit him like a physical blow. "Hell of a storm!" he shouted over the wind. The figure moved closer, and Orville could finally see a face beneath the hood. A man, probably in his 40s, with weathered features that suggested a life spent in the Alaskan wilderness. "Name's Silas," the man shouted back. "I live about 3 miles from here. The road ahead is completely blocked. Trees down everywhere. This storm is going to get worse before it gets better. You need to find shelter." "I've got shelter right here," Orville replied, patting his cab's door. Silas shook his head vigorously. "You don't understand. This isn't a normal storm. The Weather Service is calling it a polar vortex collapse. Temperatures are going to hit minus 70 by midnight. Your truck won't protect you from that. The fuel will gel, the engine will die, and you'll freeze to death in that tin can." Orville had heard of polar vortex events, but had never experienced one. If Silas was right, staying in the truck would be a death sentence. "There's an emergency shelter about a mile back," Silas continued. "It's not much, but it's insulated and has a wood stove. I'm gathering all the stranded drivers and taking them there. Already got 3 others. Orville hesitated. Every instinct told him not to abandon his truck and cargo. But minus 70 was beyond anything his rig was designed to handle. "What about my load?" he asked. "It'll be here when the storm passes," Silas replied. "But you won't be if you don't come now." The wind gusted again, this time hard enough that Orville heard something crack in his trailer. The decision was made for him. "Give me a minute to grab my emergency gear." He gathered his essentials, extra clothing, emergency food, water, a flashlight, flares, and his personal protection. A pistol he'd carried since a close call with a meth head at a rest stop 5 years ago. He locked the truck, though he doubted any thieves would be out in this weather. The walk to Silas's pickup was only 20 feet, but the cold was so intense that Orville's lungs burned with each breath. Inside the truck, blessed warmth and the presence of 3 other people bundled in winter gear. "This is Mabel," Silas said, indicating a woman in the passenger seat who looked to be in her 60s, with sharp eyes and weathered hands. "She runs the emergency shelter. These folks in the back are drivers like you." Orville recognized one of them, Tom Walsh, an owner-operator he'd seen at various stops over the years. The other was a young woman he didn't know. "Jennifer?" he asked. "Frozen River?" She nodded, looking relieved to see a familiar face. "Silas found me about 30 minutes ago. My engine was already starting to struggle." The drive to the shelter was harrowing. Silas navigated by memory more than sight, the road completely invisible beneath the snow. Several times Orville was certain they'd left the road entirely, but somehow Silas kept them moving. The shelter, when they finally reached it, was not what Orville expected. Instead of a simple warming hut, it was a substantial building, almost a small warehouse, set back from the road and partially hidden by trees. It looked old but well-maintained, with heavy wooden walls and small, high windows. "This is an emergency shelter?" Tom asked, voicing Orville's thoughts. "Used to be a research station," Mabel explained as they hurried inside. "Built in the 60s for some government project. When they abandoned it, the state converted it to an emergency shelter. We locals maintain it." The interior was surprisingly warm, with a large wood stove already burning. The main room was set up dormitory style with cots, and there were supplies stacked along the walls: food, water, medical equipment, even a small generator. "Quite the setup," Orville observed. "We take winter seriously up here," Mabel said. "Make yourselves comfortable. This storm is going to last at least 48 hours, according to the last report I heard before communications went down." "Communications are down?" Jennifer asked, alarmed. "The storm took out the cell tower about 2 hours ago," Silas explained. "Radio interference is blocking most frequencies. We're effectively cut off until this passes." As the afternoon wore into evening, more people arrived. Silas made several more trips, each time returning with stranded travelers. By nightfall, there were 12 people in the shelter, mostly truckers, but also a couple who'd been traveling to Fairbanks, and a pipeline worker trying to get to Prudhoe Bay. The atmosphere was initially one of camaraderie, strangers united by circumstances, sharing stories and food. Mabel proved to be an excellent cook, preparing a hearty stew from the shelter's supplies. Silas kept the wood stove fed, maintaining a comfortable temperature despite the howling storm outside. But as night fell, Orville began to notice things that made him uneasy. First was the shelter itself. For an emergency facility, it was too well stocked. He counted enough supplies to sustain 50 people for a month, far more than any normal emergency shelter would have. There were also areas of the building that were locked off, doors with heavy padlocks that Mabel said led to storage areas, but refused to open. Second was Silas and Mabel themselves. They moved through the shelter with a familiarity that suggested they spent significant time here, not just maintaining it, but living in it. And there were small things, the way they exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking, the way they always positioned themselves between the stranded travelers and certain areas of the building. Third, and most unsettling, was what Orville found when he stepped outside to check the weather. The storm was indeed brutal, but through a brief break in the snow, he saw something that made no sense. Silas's truck was gone, but there were multiple sets of tire tracks leading to and from the shelter, far more than could be accounted for by the rescue trips. When he came back inside, Tom pulled him aside. "Something's not right here," the older trucker whispered. "I've been on the Dalton for 15 years. I've never heard of this shelter, and I know every emergency stop on this road." "Maybe it's not on the official lists," Orville suggested. though he shared Tom's concerns. Maybe. But have you noticed there's no emergency radio? No emergency beacon? Every official shelter has them, required by law. Jennifer joined them, keeping her voice low. And why were they so prepared? Silas said the storm came out of nowhere, but they had the stove going, food prepared, like they knew we were coming. Before they could discuss further, Mabel called everyone to attention. The temperature outside has dropped to -62. I'm afraid the storm is worse than predicted. We may be here longer than 48 hours. How much longer? Asked the pipeline worker, a burly man named Carl. Hard to say, Silas replied. Could be 3 days, could be a week. But don't worry, we have plenty of supplies. A week? The male half of the traveling couple looked alarmed. We need to contact our family. Let them know we're safe. I'm afraid that's impossible right now, Mabel said sympathetically. But once the storm passes, we'll make sure everyone gets word out. Orville noticed something in her tone, a subtle emphasis on once the storm passes that seemed to carry meaning beyond the obvious. He also noticed that Silas had quietly positioned himself near the main door, and Mabel was standing by the entrance to the locked area. I think we should try to get to our trucks, Carl said. If we all go together, we can help each other. Some of these rigs have auxiliary heaters that don't depend on the engine. We'd be better off. That would be suicide, Silas interrupted firmly. The temperature will kill you in minutes. Your only chance of survival is staying here. Our only chance? Tom echoed. That's a bit dramatic, isn't it? Silas and Mabel exchanged another look. This time Orville saw something else in their expressions. Not concern for the traveler's safety, but something more calculating. Perhaps we should explain the situation more fully, Mabel said finally. This shelter isn't just for weather emergencies. It's for other situations as well. What other situations? Orville asked, his hand unconsciously moving toward the pocket where he'd stored his pistol. Situations where people need to disappear for a while, Silas said, where they need to be, protected from the outside world. The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the roaring stove. Several of the truckers stood up, instinctively grouping together. Protected from what? Jennifer asked. From themselves, mostly, Mabel replied. You see, this storm isn't entirely natural. Oh, the weather system is real enough, but its timing, its intensity, its precise location, all of that was helped along. You're saying you can control the weather? Carl laughed nervously. That's insane. Not control, Silas corrected. Influence, redirect. There are ways, old ways, known to the indigenous peoples long before the Russians or Americans came. Ways to call the wind, to summon the cold. You're both crazy, Tom said flatly. I'm leaving. He headed for the door. Silas didn't move to stop him physically, but he did say, The door won't open, not from the inside. It's for your own protection, you understand? To keep you from making fatal decisions in your panic. Tom grabbed the handle and pulled, then pushed, then threw his shoulder against it. The door didn't budge. What the hell is this? Carl demanded, moving toward Silas threateningly. Silas pulled back his coat, revealing a shotgun. Please, everyone remain calm. No one needs to get hurt. We're not going to harm you. We just need you to stay here for a while. For how long? Orville asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Until they stop looking, Mabel said simply. Who stops looking? The authorities, your companies, your families. It usually takes about 2 weeks. After that, you're presumed dead, victims of the storm. Then you can start your new lives. New lives? Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper. Alaska is vast, Mabel explained as if discussing something perfectly reasonable. There are communities off the grid, places where people can live without the burden of their past. Debts, crimes, obligations, all erased by a simple disappearance in a storm. We're not criminals, Orville said. We don't want to disappear. Don't you? Silas asked. Tom, you're behind on your truck payments, facing bankruptcy. Jennifer, you're running from an abusive ex-husband who keeps finding you no matter where you go. Carl, you've been skimming from the pipeline company for years, and they're about to discover it. And Orville, your medical test came back last month. Stage 3 lung cancer. You haven't told anyone yet, have you? The room went silent. Orville felt the blood drain from his face. How could they know? He'd only gotten the diagnosis 2 weeks ago, hadn't even told his wife yet. How? Was all he managed to say. We do our research, Mabel said. We monitor the roads, the truck stops, the communication channels. We look for people who might benefit from a fresh start. When we find enough in the same area, we call the storm. This is kidnapping, the male traveler said. His wife was clinging to his arm, terrified. This is salvation, Silas countered. You just don't realize it yet. The silence that followed Silas's revelations was broken by the sound of the wind intensifying outside. The entire building shuddered under a particularly violent gust, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the crack of trees breaking under the weight of ice and snow. You're both insane, Carl said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. The accuracy of Silas's information about his embezzlement had clearly shaken him. How long have you been doing this? Orville asked, trying to buy time while he assessed their options. The main door was sealed, but there had to be other exits. No building this size would have only one way out. 17 years, Mabel answered with a disturbing note of pride. We've helped 43 people transition to new lives. Some stay in Alaska, others move on to Canada or Russia. We have connections everywhere. Helped? Tom laughed bitterly. You mean kidnapped? We mean saved, Silas corrected firmly. Do you know what happened to the last trucker who tried to run from bankruptcy on this route? He put his rig into a ravine at 90 miles an hour, left behind a wife and 2 kids. If we'd found him first, he'd be alive today, living under a new name maybe, but alive. That's not your choice to make, Jennifer said, though Orville noticed she seemed less certain than the others. The mention of her abusive ex had visibly affected her. Isn't it? Mabel moved to a window, wiping away the condensation to peer out at the storm. We're offering you what most people only dream of, a complete reset. No debts, no past, no mistakes following you forever. And what's the cost? Orville asked. There's always a cost. Silas and Mabel exchanged another of their meaningful looks. The first 2 weeks are the hardest, Mabel said. You stay here while the search plays out. Your vehicles will be found, abandoned. The storm will be blamed. After enough time passes, you're declared dead. Then we provide you with new identities, documents, everything you need to start over. Documents you just happen to have. Tom's skepticism was obvious. We have friends in useful places, Silas said vaguely. People who understand that sometimes the system fails, that good people deserve second chances. And if we refuse? Carl asked. You can't refuse, Silas said simply. The decision has been made. The storm has been called. Your old lives are already ending. The only choice is whether you accept that with grace or fight it uselessly. The traveling couple, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up. We don't belong here, the woman said, her voice shaking. We're not truckers. We don't have problems like these people. We were just driving to see our daughter. Your daughter, Mabel said softly. The one you haven't spoken to in 3 years? The one whose husband has that restraining order against you both? The woman's face went white. The man stepped protectively in front of her. That's none of your business. Everything is our business now, Silas said. We know about the incident at Thanksgiving. We know why you're really traveling to Fairbanks. You're planning to violate that restraining order, aren't you? To see your grandchildren despite the court order? They're our grandchildren, the man shouted. We have a right. You have no rights, Silas interrupted. Not anymore. But we can give you new ones, new names, new histories. Maybe even a chance to be in your grandchildren's lives again. Eventually, once things calm down. Orville watched this exchange while discreetly surveying the room. He'd noticed something the others hadn't. There were scratch marks on the inside of the main door. Old ones, painted over but still visible if you knew where to look. This wasn't the first time people had tried to escape from this shelter. He caught Tom's eye and nodded slightly toward the door. Tom saw the marks too, his expression darkening. They weren't the first group to be held here against their will, and apparently previous groups had tried desperately to get out. I need to use the restroom, Orville announced. Down that hall, second door on the right, Mabel said, pointing. Don't try anything foolish. All the windows are barred, and the back exit is sealed just like the front. Orville walked slowly down the hallway, memorizing the layout. The bathroom was where Mabel had indicated, but he noticed other doors along the corridor. One was slightly ajar, and through the gap he could see what looked like monitoring equipment, screens showing various views of the shelter and surrounding area, so they had cameras. That explained how Silas had found the stranded truckers so efficiently. They'd been watching the road, waiting for vehicles to get trapped. In the bathroom, Orville checked his pistol. Still loaded, safety on. He'd have to be careful about when and if to reveal it. Silas had a shotgun, and there might be other weapons. He couldn't take them both alone. When he returned to the main room, he found the situation had deteriorated. Carl was on his feet, facing off with Silas, while the others had split into two groups, those who seemed resigned to their fate and those still looking for a way out. I don't care what you know about me, Carl was saying. You can't keep us here. People will come looking. The pipeline company has GPS trackers on all their vehicles. GPS doesn't work in storms like this, Silas replied calmly. And by the time it clears, your truck will be at the bottom of a ravine, another tragic casualty of the weather. You're going to destroy our trucks? We're going to relocate them to places where they'll be found eventually, supporting the narrative of weather-related accidents. It's all very carefully planned. Jennifer had moved closer to Orville and Tom. We need to work together, she whispered. If we all rush them at once. He has a shotgun, Tom reminded her quietly. And they know this building better than we do. There's monitoring equipment down the hall, Orville told them softly. They've been watching us the whole time. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. It's organized, planned. The lights flickered suddenly, and everyone froze. For a moment, it seemed like they might go out entirely, but then they steadied. Generators switching on, Mabel explained. The main power lines are probably down from the storm. Don't worry, we have plenty of fuel. How convenient, Tom muttered. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Mabel served dinner, canned soup and bread, but most people barely ate. The storm continued to rage outside, and the temperature display on the shelter's thermometer showed minus 68 degrees. We should try to get some rest, Mabel suggested around 9 p.m. Tomorrow we can discuss your situations more thoroughly, help you understand the opportunities you're being given. Opportunities, Carl spat. Is that what you call imprisonment? Would you prefer to be in federal prison for embezzlement? Silas asked pointedly. Because that's where you were heading. We're offering you freedom. This isn't freedom, Jennifer said. It will be, Mabel promised. Give it time. They were assigned cots, men on one side of the room, women on the other. Silas took first watch, sitting by the door with his shotgun across his lap. The message was clear. No one was leaving. But Orville didn't plan to sleep. He lay on his cot, fully clothed, watching and waiting. Around midnight, when Silas was replaced by Mabel for the watch, he saw his opportunity. Mabel was armed too, but with a smaller weapon, a hunting rifle. He caught Tom's eye, then Jennifer's. They were awake too. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed to different corners of the room. They understood. Surround her from 3 sides. But before they could move, something unexpected happened. The lights went out completely. Not a flicker, not a dimming, complete darkness. "Stay calm," Mabel's voice called out. "It's just the generator. Silas will fix it." But Orville heard something in her voice. Genuine surprise, maybe even fear. This wasn't part of their plan. In the darkness, he heard movement. People getting up from their cots, stumbling, cursing. Someone knocked something over with a crash. Then, from somewhere in the building, a sound that made everyone freeze. The distinct sound of breaking glass. "Silas?" Mabel called out, and now the fear in her voice was obvious. "Silas, is that you?" No response. A beam of light appeared. Someone had a flashlight. It was Carl, and he swung the beam around the room, revealing faces frozen in fear and confusion. "Where's Silas?" he asked. Mabel was standing by the door, her rifle raised. "He went to check the generator. Everyone stay where you are." But the traveling couple was missing. Their cots were empty. "Where are the Brennans?" Tom asked, referring to the couple. "They must have gone to find another way out," Jennifer suggested. Mabel looked genuinely rattled now. This wasn't going according to her plan. She moved toward the hallway, then stopped, clearly torn between investigating and maintaining control of the main room. That's when they heard the scream. It came from somewhere deeper in the building, a sound of pure terror that cut through even the howling wind outside. It was followed by a crash, and then silence. "That was Mrs. Brennan," Jennifer whispered. Mabel made a decision. "Everyone stay here. I mean it. Do not move." She headed down the hallway, her rifle at the ready. The moment she was gone, Orville was on his feet. "We need to get out now." "The door's still locked," Tom reminded him. "Then we find another way." Orville pulled out his pistol, causing several people to step back. "I'm not staying here to be disappeared." Carl grabbed a chair. "The windows are barred, but maybe we can break through." They moved to the nearest window. The bars were solid, welded in place. But as Carl raised the chair to try breaking the glass anyway, another scream echoed through the building. This one was different, deeper, masculine. "That wasn't the Brennans," Tom said. "Silas," Jennifer breathed. The lights suddenly flickered back on, revealing a scene that had changed dramatically. The door to the hallway was now open, swinging slightly as if someone had just passed through. But more disturbing was what was on the floor. A trail of blood leading from the hallway into the main room, then stopping abruptly in the center. "What the hell?" Carl backed away from the blood trail. Orville moved cautiously to the hallway, pistol raised. The corridor was empty, but he could see more blood, and the door to the monitoring room was wide open. Inside, the screens were dark, several smashed. "Someone else is here," he said. "Someone Silas and Mabel didn't expect." "Or something," Jennifer added, her voice barely a whisper. A loud bang echoed from the locked section of the building, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. "We need to leave," Tom said urgently. "Now!" Orville tried the main door, still locked. But as he examined the mechanism, he noticed something. The electronic lock had a manual override, hidden behind a small panel. It had been damaged, wires exposed and sparking. "Someone tried to break this," he said. "Recently. The Brennans? Maybe. Or maybe whoever else is in here with us." Another bang, closer this time. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the locked section. "Everyone, back away from the hallway," Orville ordered, raising his pistol. A figure appeared in the doorway. But it wasn't Silas, or Mabel, or the Brennans. It was another trucker, one Orville recognized but couldn't immediately place. The man was wearing a torn and filthy uniform from a company that had gone out of business years ago. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his hands were covered in blood. "Finally," the man said, his voice rough as if from disuse. "New arrivals. I was starting to run out of food." That's when Orville placed him. Robert Henley, a driver who'd gone missing on the Dalton Highway 3 years ago. His disappearance had been big news in the trucking community, especially because his truck had been found abandoned with no sign of struggle. "Henley," Orville said. "Robert Henley, you've been here for 3 years?" The man laughed, a sound devoid of sanity. 3 years? Try 7. Or maybe 10. Hard to keep track when they keep you in the dark, feeding you just enough to survive while they wait for the right moment to transition you. "They've been keeping you prisoner?" "In the locked section," Henley confirmed, "with the others who refused to cooperate, the ones who wouldn't accept their new lives. They keep us as examples, showing new arrivals what happens if you don't play along." "How many others?" Tom asked. "There were 6. Now there's just me." Henley's smile was terrible. "The Brennans found our section when the power went out. Accidentally let me out. I had to thank them properly." The implication was clear. Horror spread across the faces of the other truckers. "You killed them?" "Killed? No. They're transitioning. Just like Silas and Mabel are transitioning. Just like you'll all transition if you don't leave right now." "The door's locked," Carl said. Henley laughed again. "The door's been broken for an hour. I made sure of that when I visited the monitoring room. You could have left any time. But you stayed, like good little sheep, because someone told you the door wouldn't open." Orville tried the handle. The door swung open easily, revealing the storm still raging outside. "But it's -70 out there," Jennifer protested. "And in here it's worse," Henley said. "Trust me on that. I've survived 7 years of worse. The cold will kill you quick. What they had planned for you would have taken much longer." "Where are Silas and Mabel?" Orville demanded. "Transitioning," Henley repeated. "They thought they were the predators here. They were wrong. This place, this shelter, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to something much older, much hungrier. They were just its servants, bringing it fresh meat." "You're insane," Carl said. "Yes," Henley agreed easily. "Completely. But I'm also free. And if you want to be free too, you'll run. Now, while it's still digesting the others." As if to emphasize his point, a sound came from the locked section, a wet, tearing noise that couldn't possibly be human, but somehow suggested human origin. That was enough. The group rushed for the door, preferring the deadly cold to whatever was in the shelter with them. Orville was the last to leave, pausing at the threshold. "Aren't you coming?" he asked Henley. The mad trucker shook his head. "I've been here too long. I'm part of it now. But you still have a chance. Run. Get to your trucks if you can. Drive until you can't drive anymore. And never, ever stop at a shelter on the Dalton Highway again." Orville didn't need to be told twice. He plunged into the storm, following the others into the white nightmare outside. The cold hit like a physical blow, instantly numbing any exposed skin. But they pushed forward, driven by fear of what was behind them more than what was ahead. The storm attacked them the moment they left the shelter. The wind drove ice crystals into their faces like thousands of tiny needles, and the cold was so intense it felt like their lungs were freezing with each breath. Visibility was 0. They could only follow the person immediately in front of them, forming a human chain struggling through the white void. Orville had taken the lead, using his memory of the shelter's position relative to the road to guide them. Behind him, Tom held onto his jacket, then Jennifer to Tom, Carl to Jennifer, and the others strung out behind. They'd lost the pipeline worker almost immediately. He'd let go to adjust his hood and vanished into the storm. They'd called for him, but the wind swallowed their voices. Every step was agony. The snow was knee-deep in places, waist-deep in the drifts. Orville's face was completely numb within minutes, and he could feel his core temperature dropping dangerously. They had maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia became irreversible. Then, through the howling wind, he heard something that gave him hope. The distinctive ping of metal on metal. Wind hitting the side of a vehicle. He pushed forward, dragging the human chain with him, until his outstretched hand hit something solid. A truck. Not his, but it would do. He felt along the side until he found the door handle. Locked, of course. Without hesitation, he pulled out his pistol and shot the window. The glass exploded inward, and he reached through to unlock the door. "Everyone inside!" he shouted, though he could barely hear his own voice. They piled into the cab, a mass of frozen humanity cramming into a space meant for two. It was Tom's truck, he realized. The keys were still in the ignition. Tom had left them when Silas had convinced him to abandon the vehicle. Tom squeezed forward and turned the key. The engine groaned, struggled, but didn't catch. The fuel had begun to gel in the cold. "We need heat or we're dead," Carl said through chattering teeth. His lips were blue, and frost had formed on his eyebrows and beard. Orville remembered something from his winter driving training. "The auxiliary heater. Does this truck have one?" Tom nodded, reaching for a switch on the dashboard. The small diesel heater, designed to warm the cab without running the main engine, clicked on. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, blessed warmth began to flow from the vents. They huddled together, saying nothing for several minutes as feeling slowly returned to their extremities. The pain was excruciating as circulation resumed, but it meant they were alive. "We need to check on the others," Jennifer finally said. "Make sure everyone made it to vehicles." Orville peered through the shattered window. He could see the vague shapes of other trucks nearby, and what might be people moving between them. "I think they found shelter, but we can't stay here." "The engines won't start," Tom pointed out. "And even if they did, the road's impassable." "Then we wait for the storm to pass," Carl suggested. "You heard what Henley said," Jennifer countered. "Whatever's in that shelter, it's not going to stay there. And Silas said this storm could last a week." "Silas is dead," Tom reminded her. "Maybe. But the storm is real, and we don't have a week's worth of fuel for the heaters." Orville was thinking hard. "The pipeline." "What?" Carl looked at him. "The Alaska pipeline runs parallel to the highway through here. The pump stations have emergency shelters, real ones, with communication equipment. How far is the nearest one?" Carl's eyes widened with hope. "Pump Station 7 is about 8 miles north, but 8 miles in this storm will kill us," Tom finished. "We can't walk it, but we might be able to drive it," Orville said. "Not on the road, but alongside it. The ground's frozen solid. If we can get even one truck started." "The cold weather starting kit," Jennifer said suddenly. "My truck has one. Heated battery blanket, fuel additives, the works. I installed it after getting stranded 2 winters ago." "Where's your truck?" "About 50 yards back, I think. I saw it when Silas brought me in." They looked at each other, knowing what had to be done. Someone would have to go back out into the storm. "I'll go," Orville said. "Not alone," Tom countered. "We'll rope together. If Jennifer can guide us to the general area, we might find it." They used the truck's emergency rope, tying themselves together with about 6 feet between them. Jennifer gave them what directions she could remember, and they plunged back into the storm. The cold was worse the second time, their bodies already weakened from the first exposure. They stumbled through the snow, feeling for the shapes of vehicles. Twice they found trucks that weren't Jennifer's, having to backtrack each time. Finally, Orville's searching hands found a Freightliner with the right company logo. The door was locked, but Jennifer had given him her keys. The engine, when he tried it, gave a slightly more promising sound than Tom's had. The cold weather modifications were doing their job. He found the additive kit under the driver's seat and poured it directly into the fuel tank through the emergency port. Then he located the battery warmer controls and activated them. It would take precious minutes for them to work, minutes they spent huddled in the cab, watching the storm rage outside. "Look," Tom said suddenly, pointing through the windshield. A light was moving through the storm, coming from the direction of the shelter. Not vehicle headlights, but something smaller, handheld maybe. It moved with purpose, heading toward the cluster of abandoned trucks. "Henley?" Tom suggested. "Or something else," Orville replied. He checked his pistol. 3 shots left after breaking the window. The light stopped at one of the trucks, lingered for a moment, then moved to the next. It was searching. "Try the engine," Orville urged. Tom turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then caught. The sound was beautiful, but it also gave away their position. The searching light immediately oriented toward them. "Go!" Orville shouted. Tom threw the truck into gear and pressed the accelerator. The wheels spun on ice, then found traction. They lurched forward, the headlights cutting through the storm to reveal a hellscape of white. The road was completely obscured, but Tom kept the truck moving, using the barely visible tree line as a guide. Behind them, the searching light had started moving faster, following their tracks. "We need to get the others," Jennifer said from the back. "We'll come back for them," Orville promised, though he wondered if that would be possible. They drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the truck struggling through drifts, sliding on ice, threatening to bog down at every turn. The fuel gauge was dropping alarmingly fast. The engine was working hard to maintain power in the extreme cold. Then, through the storm, a structure appeared. Not the pump station. They weren't nearly far enough north for that. It was another building, smaller than the shelter they'd fled, but substantial enough to have withstood the storm. "What is that?" Jennifer asked. "Old maintenance shed," Carl said. "I remember it from the pipeline maps. It's abandoned, but it might have supplies." They had to make a decision. Continue toward the pump station with failing fuel or investigate the shed. The searching light was no longer visible behind them, but that didn't mean they weren't being followed. "We check it out," Orville decided. "Quick search for fuel or communication equipment, then move on." Tom pulled up to the shed. It was a metal structure, probably from the pipeline's construction era. The door was secured with a padlock, but it was so rusted that one blow from a tire iron shattered it. Inside, they found a time capsule from the 1970s, old equipment, boxes of supplies, and remarkably, several drums of diesel fuel. It was old, probably contaminated, but with enough additives, it might work. "This could get us to the pump station," Tom said. But Carl had found something else. In a corner, covered by a tarp, was a radio setup. Ancient by modern standards, but when he connected it to the truck's battery, it crackled to life. "This is emergency broadcast on all channels," Carl spoke into the microphone. "Multiple civilians stranded mile marker 240, Dalton Highway. Require immediate assistance. Repeat, emergency assistance required." Static answered him. Then, faintly, a voice emerged. "This is Pump Station 7. We read you. State the nature of your emergency." Relief flooded through them. Carl quickly explained their situation, leaving out the more unbelievable parts about the shelter and focusing on the stranded truckers and the storm. "Negative on immediate extraction," the operator responded. "Storm has all aircraft grounded, but we can guide you in if you have a working vehicle, 8.3 miles north-northeast of your position." "We have multiple civilians in vehicles near our original position." Orville took the microphone. "Unknown condition." "Understood." We'll dispatch recovery vehicles as soon as the storm permits. Can you make it here?" Orville looked at the others. They had fuel now and directions, but they'd be leaving the other truckers behind, at least temporarily. "We need to go back," Jennifer said. "We can't leave them." "If we go back, we might all die," Tom argued. "That thing, whatever it was hunting. It was looking for us specifically," Orville said, realizing the truth. "We're the ones who escaped. The others might be safe in their trucks." "Or they might be frozen to death," Carl added grimly. They argued for precious minutes before Orville made the decision. "We fuel up, then make one pass by the trucks. Anyone we can get to quickly we bring. Anyone we can't, we come back for them with help from the pump station." It took them 30 minutes to transfer enough fuel to the truck, using a hand pump they found in the shed. The storm had intensified, if anything, and the temperature gauge now read -74 degrees. The drive back toward the abandoned trucks was harrowing. Twice they nearly slid off what they thought was the road. But finally, the cluster of vehicles appeared in their headlights. Orville jumped out, leaving the truck running, and ran to the nearest cab. Empty. The next one had 2 truckers huddled inside, barely conscious from the cold. They dragged them to Jennifer's truck. The third vehicle had the pipeline worker who'd gotten separated from them initially. He was unconscious, but alive. "That's all we can carry," Tom said. "The truck's already overloaded." But Orville had noticed something. Several of the trucks were missing. Either they'd gotten them started and left, or... "We go now," he decided. The drive to Pump Station 7 took 2 hours through the storm. Several times they had to stop to dig out of drifts, all of them taking turns in the killing cold. The rescued truckers slowly revived in the warmth of the cab, confused and frightened, but alive. When the lights of the pump station finally appeared through the storm, it felt like a miracle. The facility was built to withstand anything Alaska could throw at it, and its massive diesel generators ensured constant power and heat. The station crew met them with medical equipment and warm blankets. As they were helped inside, Orville looked back through the storm in the direction they'd come from. Somewhere out there was the shelter with its horrifying secret. Somewhere out there was Robert Henley, if he was still alive or still human. And somewhere out there were the missing truckers, their fate unknown. The station chief, a weathered man named Patterson, listened to their story with skepticism that gradually turned to concern. "We've had reports of that shelter," he admitted quietly to Orville while the others were being treated. "Truckers going missing, strange stories from those who claim to escape, but nothing we could prove. The state authorities say it doesn't exist, that there's no structure at those coordinates." "It exists," Orville said firmly. "And something's living in it, something that uses people like Silas and Mabel to bring it food." Patterson was quiet for a moment. "The indigenous peoples have stories about this area, things that came before, things that never left. Most of us dismissed them as legends." "Not legends," Orville said. "Not anymore. When the storm clears, we'll send a team," Patterson promised. "A full investigation." But Orville knew what they would find. An empty building, if they found anything at all. No trace of Silas or Mabel or the Brennans. No evidence of Robert Henley or the locked section with its horrible secret. Whatever lurked in that shelter had survived for who knows how long by being careful, by leaving no proof. The storm continued for 3 more days. When it finally cleared and rescue teams reached the area where the trucks had been abandoned, they found 4 of the vehicles. The others, including Orville's own truck, were gone. No tracks, no explanation, just absence. The official report blamed the storm. Truckers had abandoned their vehicles and sought shelter, some making it to Pump Station 7, others presumed lost in the blizzard. The shelter Orville described was never found, despite extensive searching. The coordinates led to empty wilderness, but Orville knew the truth. And sometimes, on cold nights when he was driving the Dalton Highway, because he still did, unable to stay away despite everything, he would see lights off the road where no lights should be. He would hear voices on the CB radio calling for help, giving positions that didn't exist. And once, just once, he saw a figure standing by the roadside in a storm. It looked like Robert Henley, still in his torn uniform, still with those hollow eyes. The figure raised a hand as Orville passed, not waving but pointing, directing him toward a turnoff that Orville knew led to nowhere good. He didn't stop. He never stopped anymore. Not for anything, not in storms. Because he knew now that there were things in the Alaska wilderness that fed on isolation and trust, things that used human agents to bring them prey. The other survivors from that night didn't talk about it much. They'd been believed even less than Orville, but sometimes, at truck stops, they'd recognize each other and share a look of understanding. They were the ones who knew that not every shelter was safe, not every offer of help was genuine, and not every storm was natural. And they all knew, without having to discuss it, that somewhere out there, the thing in the shelter was still waiting, still hungry, and that Silas and Mabel had probably been replaced by now. New faces, same purpose, calling storms and gathering travelers. The Dalton Highway stretched on, beautiful and deadly, hiding its secrets in the white silence of winter. 3 weeks after the storm, Orville sat in a small office in Anchorage, across from a state investigator named Detective Monica Harrison. She'd been assigned to investigate the Dalton Highway incident, as it was being called in official reports. The walls were covered with maps, photographs of the abandoned trucks, and witness statements that contradicted each other in fundamental ways. "Mr. Hutchins," Harrison said, reviewing her notes, "you maintain that you and 11 other people were held against your will in a shelter that we cannot locate." "That's correct," Orville replied evenly. He'd told this story a dozen times now to various officials. And this shelter was run by 2 individuals, Silas and Mabel, who claimed they could control weather patterns. "Influence them. That's the word they used." Harrison showed him a photograph. "We found 2 bodies near the coordinates you provided, severely damaged by exposure and other trauma. DNA analysis is ongoing, but preliminary measurements match your description of these individuals." Orville leaned forward, so they had found something. "However," Harrison continued, "the bodies were found in the open, no structure nearby, no evidence of any building ever being there." "It was there," Orville insisted. "Tom Walsh saw it. Jennifer Park saw it. Carl Hendricks," Harrison interrupted, "who disappeared from the pump station 2 days after you arrived. His room was found empty, window open, no sign of struggle." Orville hadn't known that. Carl had seemed fine when he'd last seen him, eager to return to his family and face whatever consequences awaited him for his embezzlement. "What about the Brennans, the traveling couple?" "No record of anyone by that name traveling the Dalton Highway during that time period. No missing persons reports matching their description." "That's impossible. They were there. Henley said that they were attacked." "Robert Henley." Harrison pulled out another file. "Disappeared 3 years ago. You claim he was held prisoner in this shelter. Mr. Hutchins, Robert Henley's body was found 18 months ago in a ravine 20 miles from where he disappeared. He'd been dead for over a year at that point." The room seemed to spin. "No, that's not possible. I talked to him. He let us out. Several of the other survivors report seeing someone matching Henley's description," Harrison admitted. "But that's physiologically impossible. Dead men don't walk around helping people escape from imaginary shelters." "Then explain the bodies you found. Explain the missing trucks. Explain how we all ended up at Pump Station 7 with matching stories." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Mass hallucination brought on by extreme cold and carbon monoxide exposure from running heaters in enclosed spaces. That's the working theory." "That's ridiculous. Is it more ridiculous than a shelter that disappears, run by people who control weather, hiding something that feeds on human beings?" Orville had no answer for that. Harrison leaned back in her chair. Off the record, Mr. Hutchins, we've had 17 similar incidents reported over the past decade. Groups of people, usually in extreme weather, reporting encounters with structures that don't exist, people who can't be real. The stories are always similar, but never quite the same. Always in remote areas, always during storms, always with some survivors, but never any physical evidence. You believe me? I believe something happened to you. I'm not sure even you know exactly what it was. That night, Orville returned to his motel room to find Jennifer waiting outside his door. She looked haggard, dark circles under her eyes. "They think I'm crazy," she said without preamble. "My company put me on psychiatric leave. My ex-husband is using it as evidence that I'm unstable." "I'm sorry," Orville said, unlocking his door and gesturing for her to come in. "Tom's gone," she continued. "His wife said he took his truck out last week, said he was going to find proof. He hasn't come back." Orville felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. He went back to look for the shelter? That's what his wife thinks. She gave me this. Jennifer handed him a notebook. "Tom's been keeping notes, tracking patterns. Look at this." The notebook was filled with Tom's cramped handwriting, documenting weather patterns, disappearances, and something else. Reports of structures appearing and disappearing along remote routes throughout Alaska. "He found 12 other incidents," Jennifer said. "Same pattern every time. Severe weather, stranded travelers, a shelter that shouldn't exist, and then nothing. No evidence, just missing people and survivors with stories no one believes." One entry caught Orville's eye. Tom had written, "The shelters aren't separate incidents. They're connected. Same entity, moving along the pipeline like it's following something underground. The pipeline doesn't just carry oil. It's a highway for something else." He thought the pipeline was involved? More than that. Jennifer flipped to another page. He found construction records from the 1970s. Several sections of the pipeline were rerouted for geological reasons that were never fully explained. Each reroute corresponds to an area where these incidents have occurred. Orville studied the map Tom had drawn. The pattern was clear once you saw it. A network of locations connected by the pipeline, each one a potential feeding ground. "We need to take this to the authorities," Orville said. "With what credibility? They already think we're delusional. And now Tom's missing, probably dead because he tried to find proof." They sat in silence for a moment before Jennifer spoke again. "I've been having dreams about the shelter, about that room Henley came from. In the dreams I can see others in there. People who've been missing for years, kept barely alive, waiting." "Dreams aren't real," Orville said, but he'd been having similar dreams. "Henley wasn't real either, according to the authorities. But we both saw him. We both heard him speak." Orville's phone rang, interrupting them. It was Patterson from Pump Station 7. "Orville, you need to know something," Patterson said without preamble. "We've been monitoring unusual activity along the pipeline, electromagnetic anomalies, pressure variations that don't make sense. They're increasing in frequency." "What does that mean?" "It means something's moving down there, something big, and it's heading north, toward Prudhoe Bay. If it reaches the main processing facility." Patterson didn't need to finish. Prudhoe Bay was the heart of Alaska's oil industry. Thousands of workers, massive infrastructure, and connections to pipelines throughout North America. "There's more," Patterson continued. "We've been getting distress calls on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Truckers reporting being guided to shelters that our maps say aren't there. 5 in the last 2 days alone." "It's hunting," Orville said. "Whatever that thing was, it's actively hunting now." "Or migrating," Patterson suggested, "moving to richer feeding grounds." After Patterson hung up, Orville turned to Jennifer. "We need to warn people." "How?" "No one believes us, and anyone we do convince will probably end up like Tom,
trying to find proof and becoming another victim. But Orville had an idea. We don't need to convince the authorities. We need to convince the truckers. They're the ones at risk.
Over the next 3 days, Orville and Jennifer worked to spread the word through the informal networks that connected long-haul drivers. CB radio chatter, truck stop bulletin boards, online forums. They didn't try to explain everything, just warned about accepting help from strangers during storms, about shelters that seemed too good to be true. Some dismissed them as cranks. But others listened, especially those who'd had their own strange experiences on remote routes. A community of watchers formed, drivers who kept extra vigilant during storms, who reported unusual shelter locations, who checked on each other when someone went silent. Then, a week later, the news broke. A massive explosion at a pump station near Prudhoe Bay, cause unknown. The official report blamed mechanical failure, but workers who escaped reported something else, a presence in the underground maintenance tunnels, something that had been feeding on the petroleum products and growing. The explosion had killed it, or at least dispersed it. The electromagnetic anomalies stopped. The mysterious shelters stopped appearing. The storms returned to normal patterns. But Orville knew it wasn't over. Whatever that thing had been, it was old and patient and had survived who knows how many attempts to destroy it. It would regroup, find new servants like Silas and Mabel, establish new feeding grounds. He returned to trucking, but now he carried more than just cargo. In his cab was a CB radio permanently tuned to Channel 19, listening for distress calls that might lead to something more sinister. He had maps marked with every reported incident, patterns that might predict where the next hunting ground would appear. Jennifer did the same, and so did others. They called themselves the Watchers, drivers who knew the truth about what lurked in Alaska's wilderness. They couldn't stop it, but they could warn others, could rescue those who might otherwise disappear into non-existent shelters. One night, 6 months after the incident, Orville was driving through a spring storm on the Dalton Highway when his radio crackled to life. "Breaker, breaker. This is Lost River southbound, near marker 150. Found a shelter here that's not on my maps. Real friendly folks offering hot food and a warm place to wait out the weather." Orville grabbed his mic immediately. "Lost River. This is Big Oak. Negative on that shelter. Get back in your truck and keep moving. That shelter isn't real, and those people aren't what they seem." There was a pause, then, "Big Oak, how do you know?" "I can see it right here. Lights on. Smoke from the chimney." "Trust me," Orville said urgently. "I've been where you are. That shelter will kill you. Drive away now, don't look back. And whatever you do, don't get out of your truck." A different voice came on the radio, older, female, sweet as honey. "This is Mabel at the shelter. Don't listen to him, dear. Some truckers get confused in the cold. We have hot coffee and warm beds. You look tired." Orville's blood ran cold. The same name, the same voice. But Mabel was dead. Harrison had shown him the body. "Lost River, that woman is not what she seems," Orville transmitted. "Check your mirrors. Is your truck still where you parked it?" A pause, then Lost River's voice, shaky now. It's moved. I parked by the entrance, but now I'm 50 feet closer to the building. How did—" "Get out now!" Orville shouted into the mic. The sound of an engine starting, wheels spinning on ice, then Lost River's panicked voice. "The door to the shelter just opened and there's— Oh God, what is that? That's not human, it's—" Static exploded across the channel. Then silence. Orville floored his accelerator, pushing his truck as fast as he dared on the icy road. Mile marker 150 was 40 minutes away in good conditions. In this storm, maybe an hour. He kept trying the radio. "Lost River. Come back. Anyone near marker 150, please respond." Finally, a weak signal. "Big Oak. This is Lost River. I got away, but there's something following me. I can see it in my mirrors.
It's keeping pace with my truck at 60 miles per hour, running on all fours, but it's wearing Mabel's dress. How is that possible? Keep driving, Orville instructed. Don't stop for anything. I'm 30 minutes out. It's gaining. Oh God, it just jumped onto my trailer. I can hear it on the roof, scratching.
The transmission cut off again. When Orville reached mile marker 150, he found Lost River's truck jackknifed across both lanes, the cab torn open like a tin can. Blood spray on the snow, but no body. Drag marks led toward the tree line. He grabbed his pistol and a flashlight, following the trail. 50 yards into the woods, he found a structure that shouldn't exist. The same shelter, or one identical to it. Lights on, smoke rising from the chimney, looking warm and inviting. The front door was open. Against every instinct, Orville entered. The interior was exactly as he remembered. The same layout, the same furniture, even the same smell. But everything was slightly wrong, as if it was a reproduction made by something that didn't quite understand human spaces.
Hello, Orville.
He spun around. Mabel stood there, looking exactly as she had months ago. But her movements were jerky, puppet-like, and when she smiled, there were too many teeth.
You're not Mabel, Orville said, raising his pistol. I am Mabel. I've always been Mabel. Every Mabel that ever was.
Her head tilted at an impossible angle.
Just as Silas has always been Silas. We are roles, not people. Functions, not individuals. Where's the other trucker? Transitioning. Like you should have transitioned. You were marked, chosen. Why did you resist? Because I'm human. Human. She said the word like it was foreign. Such a limiting concept. We offer so much more. Immortality, purpose, freedom from your biological constraints. You offer slavery to that thing underground. Partnership, she corrected. It needs us to gather food. We need it to exist beyond our normal spans. It's perfectly symbiotic. Movement in the shadows. Lost River emerged, but changed. His proportions were wrong, stretched and compressed in nauseating ways. His eyes were flat, dead, reflecting light like a nocturnal animal's. Run, he whispered to Orville, and for a moment, humanity flickered in his expression. Can't hold it back much longer. Run! Orville backed toward the door, keeping his gun trained on Mabel. She made no move to stop him. You'll be back, she said calmly. They always come back. The mark calls to you. You feel it, don't you? The pull northward? The dreams that aren't quite dreams? You're part of the network now, whether you accept it or not. Orville fled, making it to his truck and driving away as fast as the ice would allow. In his mirrors, the shelter receded, then vanished entirely as if it had never been. He drove straight to Pump Station 7, where Patterson listened to his story with grim acceptance. It's spreading, Patterson said. We're getting reports from all over Alaska now. Shelters appearing during storms, people disappearing, others changed. The explosion didn't kill it, it just scattered it. Then we fight it, Orville said. We warn everyone. We patrol the roads during storms. We save who we can. Patterson shook his head. The state government has classified all of this. Official position is that these are hallucinations caused by extreme weather conditions. Anyone who persists in spreading panic-inducing folklore faces arrest. They're covering it up. They're containing panic. Imagine if people knew that there were things under Alaska that could create structures from nothing, that could take human form, that fed on travelers. The economy would collapse. The pipeline would shut down. So we just let people die? We do what we can, quietly. The Watchers, as you call yourselves, you're our best defense. Keep warning truckers, keep patrolling, but carefully. Don't draw official attention. Orville left the pump station determined to continue the fight.
But over the following months, it became harder. The shelters grew more sophisticated, the fake Mabels and Silases more convincing. They adapted to the warnings, creating new scenarios, new traps, and the dreams grew stronger. Every night, Orville saw visions of the underground network, vast caverns connected by the pipeline, filled with things that had never been human but wore human faces. He saw the transformed truckers, hundreds of them now, serving their new master with perfect obedience. In the dreams, he was one of them, and it felt right, natural, like coming home. Jennifer disappeared 3 months later, her truck found running but empty on a clear summer day. No storm, no shelter, just absence. Tom's body was never found. Carl had vanished from the pump station. One by one, the watchers were being taken or transformed. On a cold December night, exactly 1 year after his first encounter, Orville found himself parked at mile marker 240 on the Dalton Highway. He didn't remember driving there. The mark on his skin, invisible to others but burning like fire to him, had guided him. The shelter materialized out of the snow, exactly as it had been. The door opened, and Mabel stepped out. The real Mabel this time, or as real as she could be. "Welcome home, Orville," she said. "We've been patient, but it's time. The network needs you. Your resistance has been noted and admired. You'll make an excellent recruiter." Orville reached for his pistol, but his hand wouldn't obey. The mark was in control now. "Don't fight it," Mabel said gently. "Everyone comes home eventually. Even the strongest. Especially the strongest." As he walked toward the shelter, Orville managed one last act of defiance. He keyed his CB radio, broadcasting on Channel 19. "This is Big Oak at marker 240. The shelter is real. They're all real. Don't trust anyone offering help in a storm. Don't stop. Never stop. The moment you stop, you're theirs." Then he dropped the radio in the snow and walked into the shelter. Inside, Silas was waiting, along with Jennifer, Tom, Carl, and dozens of others, all transformed but recognizable, all wearing the same patient, empty smiles. "The transition is painless," Jennifer said in a voice that wasn't quite hers. "You'll serve the network, bring in new feeders, maintain the shelters. In exchange, you'll live forever, or close enough. And if I refuse?" "You can't," Tom said simply. "The mark won't let you. You've been ours since that first night. We just let you run to see how far you'd get, how many others you'd warn. It made the hunt more interesting." Orville felt his humanity slipping away, replaced by something cold and ancient and hungry. His last human thought was a warning, broadcast telepathically through the mark to any watcher who might sense it. The shelters aren't shelters, they're mouths, and Alaska is full of teeth. Then Orville Hutchins ceased to exist, replaced by another recruiter for the network, another Silas to pair with a Mabel, maintaining an eternal trap for travelers on the ice roads of Alaska. Somewhere on the Dalton Highway, a trucker's CB radio crackled with static that almost sounded like words. "Never stop, never stop, never stop." But in storms, when visibility drops and the cold threatens death, sometimes stopping seems like the only choice. And there's always a shelter waiting, warm and inviting, with friendly faces and hot coffee and promises of safety. The network grows. The pipeline feeds it. And the ice roads of Alaska remain the most dangerous in the world, not because of the weather or the isolation, but because of what waits in the spaces between civilization, patient and hungry and wearing human faces. The Wolverine Creek mining camp sat 97 miles northwest of Nome, accessible only by a narrow ice road that existed just 4 months out of the year. Clarence Pike had been making supply runs to remote mining operations for 18 years, But something felt wrong the moment his truck crested the final ridge and the camp came into view. It was 3 in the afternoon, but the December darkness made it feel like midnight. His headlights swept across the collection of prefab buildings that made up the camp: the main office, workers' quarters, equipment sheds, and the massive processing facility where gold-bearing ore was separated from worthless rock. Everything looked normal at first glance. The lights were on, smoke rose from chimneys, and the equipment yard's floodlights illuminated millions of dollars worth of heavy machinery. But there was no movement, no workers trudging between buildings, no vehicles operating, no signs of the constant activity that defined a working mine. Clarence brought his 18-wheeler to a stop in the designated loading area and checked his paperwork. December 15th, 2 p.m. delivery window. He was actually an hour late due to ice conditions on the road, but that had never been a problem before. The Wolverine Creek crew understood the challenges of winter transport. He tried the radio first. "Wolverine Creek, this is Transport 779 with your supply delivery. Please advise on unloading." He tried again on different channels. Nothing. Clarence pulled on his heavy parka and climbed down from the cab. The temperature was minus 31 degrees, cold enough that his breath instantly crystallized in the air. The only sound was the hum of generators and the distant whistle of wind through the mountain passes. The main office was the logical first stop. Clarence trudged through knee-deep snow, noting that there were no fresh footprints anywhere. The last snowfall had been 2 days ago, according to weather reports, which meant no one had walked between buildings since then. The office door was unlocked. Inside, the reception area was warm and lit. Papers spread across the desk as if someone had just stepped away. A coffee mug sat half full, a thin layer of ice formed on top despite the heating. "Hello?" Clarence called out. "Anyone here? Got your supplies?" His voice echoed through empty corridors. He found the duty roster on the wall. According to it, there should be 43 personnel on site, including the foreman, Otis McGrath, whom Clarence had dealt with many times before. Otis was a gruff but fair man who'd run mining camps across Alaska for 30 years. The radio room was down the hall. Maybe they were having communication problems. But when Clarence entered, he found the equipment functioning perfectly. The emergency beacon that would activate if the camp was in distress was silent. A logbook lay open on the operator's desk. The last entry was from 3 days ago. 0800. Routine check-in with Nome office. All systems normal. Bradley. 3 days of silence from a camp that was supposed to check in twice daily. Clarence felt the first real stirrings of fear. He'd heard stories of mining camps where everyone had died from carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty heaters, or where virulent diseases had swept through the confined population. But this didn't feel like that. The air was clean. The power was on. Everything was functional. He decided to check the workers' quarters next. The building housed most of the miners in small individual rooms. The common area was eerily normal. Magazines on tables, a paused game of poker with chips still stacked, someone's dinner congealed on a plate. The first room he checked was empty, bed unmade, personal effects scattered about. The second was the same. By the 10th empty room, Clarence was genuinely spooked. Where were 43 people? A sound from somewhere above made him freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the floor of the second story. "Hello?" he called out again. "This is Clarence Pike with your supply delivery. Is someone up there?" The footsteps stopped. Clarence climbed the stairs, his hand instinctively moving to the knife he kept on his belt. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The second floor was darker, only emergency lighting functioning. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly open, light spilling from within. Clarence approached carefully, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He pushed the door open to find the camp's mess hall, and there, standing at the stove with her back to him, was Agnes Rourke, the camp cook. "Agnes," Clarence said, relief flooding through him. "Thank God. Where is everyone?" Agnes turned slowly, and Clarence's relief evaporated. Her face was wrong. She had the features of Agnes, the gray hair pulled back in the same bun, the same flour-dusted apron. But her expression was blank, her eyes unfocused, and when she smiled, it didn't reach those empty eyes. "Clarence," she said in a voice that was almost Agnes's, but not quite. "You're early." "I'm actually late. Agnes, where is everyone? Where's Otis?" "Otis is in the mine. They're all in the mine. Working." "All of them? All 43 people are in the mine right now?" "Yes. Important work. Very important." She turned back to the stove, stirring something in a large pot. "Are you hungry? I'm making stew." Clarence moved closer, trying to see what was in the pot. The smell hit him first, metallic and wrong. The contents looked like stew, but the meat was an odd color, and there were things floating in it that didn't belong in any recipe he knew. "Agnes, are you feeling all right? You seem different." "I'm better than all right," she replied, still stirring. "I understand now. We all understand. The mine showed us." "Showed you what?" "What's really down there. What's always been down there. Waiting." She ladled some of the stew into a bowl and held it out to him. "You should eat. You'll need strength for the work." Clarence didn't take the bowl. "I need to talk to Otis. Can you radio him?" "No radios in the mine. Interference. But he'll be back soon. They all will, when the shift ends." "When does the shift end?" Agnes's smile widened. "When the work is done." Clarence backed toward the door. "I'm going to start unloading the supplies. Tell Otis to find me when he gets back." He left quickly, his mind racing. Something was catastrophically wrong here. Agnes had always been sharp, quick-witted, complaining about the miners' appetites and the limited ingredients. This vacant, smiling woman was not the Agnes he knew. The entrance to the mine was a half-mile from the main camp, accessed by a rough road that wound up the mountainside. Clarence could see lights up there, the glow of the processing equipment that ran 24 hours a day. He should leave. Every instinct told him to get in his truck and drive away. But 43 people were missing, and if they were in trouble, he might be their only hope of help. Instead of heading to the mine immediately, Clarence returned to his truck and tried his satellite phone. It connected, miracle of miracles, and he called his dispatcher in Nome. "Clarence, how's the delivery going?" Jim's familiar voice was reassuring. "Jim, something's wrong at Wolverine Creek. The camp's nearly deserted. Only the cook is here and she's acting strange. She says everyone's in the mine, but that doesn't make sense." "Strange how?" "Like she's, I don't know, drugged maybe, or sick. She's not herself." There was a pause. "Clarence, I'm looking at Wolverine Creek's reports. They've been filing regular updates. Increased productivity, actually. They pulled record amounts of ore last week." "When did they last check in?" "This morning. Foreman McGrath himself called in the numbers." That was impossible. The radio log showed no communication for 3 days. "Jim, I think you should contact the authorities. Something's not right here." "Are you sure? False alarm could cost us this contract." "I'm sure. Send help." "All right. But Clarence, if everyone's in the mine working, maybe you should just unload and leave. Don't get involved in whatever's going on." Good advice. But Clarence couldn't shake the feeling that if he left now, those 43 people would never be seen again. After ending the call, he grabbed a flashlight and his emergency kit from the truck. The walk to the mine entrance took 20 minutes through deep snow and biting wind. As he got closer, he could hear the rumble of machinery from deep underground, felt the vibration through his feet. The mine entrance was a modern setup, with a large elevator system for bringing up ore and taking down workers. The operator's booth was empty, but the elevator was at the surface level, doors open, waiting. Warning signs were posted everywhere. Authorized personnel only. Hard hat area. Check in with foreman before descending. Clarence found a hard hat and reflective vest in the equipment shed. If he was going down, he'd at least try to look like he belonged. The elevator was designed to carry 30 people or several tons of ore. Clarence hit the button for the main level, 300 feet down. The descent seemed to take forever, the cables groaning, the walls of the shaft pressing in. When the doors opened, he stepped into a different world. The main tunnel was carved from solid rock, reinforced with steel beams and modern lighting. Rail tracks ran along the floor for the ore carts. The sound of machinery was louder here, echoing off the walls. But it was the temperature that surprised him. It should have been warmer underground, protected from the Arctic cold. Instead, it felt colder, a chill that seemed to come from the rock itself. Clarence followed the main tunnel, passing several smaller passages that branched off into darkness. Signs indicated different sections of the mine. Shaft 3, old workings, unsafe, new vein, authorized only. He followed the sounds of machinery, expecting to find the missing workers at any moment. The tunnel curved, descended, split into multiple passages. He tried to keep track of his path, but the mine was a maze. Finally, he heard voices ahead, multiple voices, talking in unison, the same words repeated over and over. Dig deeper, find the source, feed the mountain. Clarence crept forward, staying in the shadows. The tunnel opened into a large chamber where the main excavation was taking place. What he saw there made him press back against the wall, his mind struggling to process the scene. All 42 missing workers were there, but they weren't mining in any conventional sense. They moved in perfect synchronization, their picks and shovels rising and falling in unison. Their faces were blank, like Agnes's, and they chanted as they worked. Dig deeper, find the source, feed the mountain. In the center of them all stood Otis McGrath, but like Agnes, he was changed. His eyes reflected the artificial light like an animal's, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than his throat. Faster, Otis commanded. It's hungry. We're so close now, so close to breaking through. That's when Clarence noticed what they were digging toward. The rock face at the far end of the chamber was different from the surrounding stone. It was black, so black it seemed to absorb light, and it pulsed with a rhythm like a massive heartbeat. One of the workers suddenly collapsed, his pick falling from nerveless fingers. Without missing a beat, 2 others grabbed him and dragged him toward the black rock. They pressed him against its surface, and Clarence watched in horror as the worker seemed to sink into the stone, absorbed like water into a sponge. The black rock pulsed brighter, and the remaining workers increased their pace. Good, Otis said. It accepts the offering. We're almost through. Soon it will be free, and we will be rewarded. Clarence had seen enough. He began backing away, trying to move silently, but his foot struck a loose piece of ore, sending it clattering across the floor. Every head in the chamber turned toward him in perfect unison. Clarence, Otis said, his voice carrying despite the distance. You're early, but perhaps that's fortunate. We need fresh strength. Come, join the work. The workers began moving toward him, still in that horrifying synchronization, their tools raised. Clarence turned and ran, their footsteps echoing behind him. He took the first turn he saw, then another, plunging deeper into the mine's warren of tunnels. He could hear them following, not running but walking with that same measured pace, confident that he couldn't escape. The mine was their domain now. Clarence's flashlight beam swept across the tunnel walls as he ran, revealing older sections of the mine, areas that predated the modern operation. The support beams here were wood, not steel, and covered in strange symbols that hurt to look at directly. He stumbled into a small chamber and stopped, breathing hard. An old mining camp was set up here, rusty tools, rotting canvas, and journals scattered on a makeshift table. Clarence grabbed one of the journals, scanning it quickly. The entries were from 1923, from the original mining operation that had been abandoned under mysterious circumstances. The last entry read, "We should never have dug this deep. The natives warned us, but we didn't listen. It's not gold down here. It's something else, something that's been sleeping. Burton says it speaks to him in his dreams, tells him to dig deeper. Half the men are acting strange, moving together like they share one mind. We're leaving tonight if we can. God help whoever finds this place next." The footsteps were getting closer. Clarence shoved the journal into his pocket and looked for another exit. There, a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a man. He squeezed through, his jacket tearing on the rough stone. The narrow passage led Clarence deeper into the mountain, away from the modern mine workings and into tunnels that hadn't seen human presence in decades. His flashlight beam revealed ancient timber supports, many rotted through and barely holding the weight of the rock above. Every step sent small cascades of dirt and pebbles from the ceiling. Behind him, he could no longer hear distinct footsteps, but there was something worse, a rhythmic vibration through the rock itself, as if the entire mountain was pulsing in time with that black stone. The workers weren't chasing him anymore. They were returning to their excavation, confident he couldn't escape. The passage opened into another chamber, this one containing the remains of the 1920s mining operation. Rusted equipment lay scattered about, and more disturbingly, human bones were piled in one corner, still wearing the remnants of period clothing. Clarence examined the scene more carefully. The bones showed no signs of violence. These people had simply sat down and died, arranged in a circle as if participating in some final ritual. In the center of their circle, carved deep into the stone floor, was a symbol that made Clarence's eyes water to look at directly. His satellite phone buzzed. Impossible at this depth, but it was definitely receiving a signal. He answered it. "Clarence?" It was Agnes's voice, but different from how she'd sounded in the mess hall. This was the old Agnes, frightened and desperate. "Clarence, can you hear me? Agnes, where are you?" "I don't know. Somewhere dark. We're all here, all of us, but we can't move, can't control our bodies. It's using us, Clarence. The thing in the mountain." "What thing? Agnes, what's happening?" "It's been here forever, sleeping in the rock. The mining woke it up. First in the 20s, but they managed to seal it back in. Now we've gone too deep. Otis broke through 3 days ago, and it took us all at once." "How are you calling me?" "I'm not. Not really. It's letting me talk to you. It wants you to know." Her voice changed, becoming multiple voices speaking in unison. "You cannot stop this. The mountain is waking. Soon it will walk, and we will be its limbs, its hands, its tools. You will join us or feed us. There is no other option." The line went dead. Clarence tried calling back, but there was no signal anymore. He needed to get out, warn people, bring help. But first, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. The journal from 1923 might have more information. He pulled it out and read more entries by flashlight. August 15th, 1923. The Inuit workers refuse to enter the new shaft. They say we've dug into a hungry place and that some things should stay buried. Superstitious nonsense, but they won't be swayed. August 22nd, 1923. Strange minerals in the new vein, black as pitch and warm to the touch. Jeffries claims he can hear it humming. Several men have reported nightmares about something vast and ancient calling to them. September 3rd, 1923. We broke through into a natural cavern today. The walls are covered in symbols that predate any known indigenous culture. Professor Whitmore from the university is coming to investigate. September 10th, 1923. Whitmore is dead. He translated some of the symbols and immediately tried to dynamite the entrance. Said we'd awakened something that should have slept until the sun died. The men killed him before he could destroy our find. They're not themselves anymore. September 15th, 1923. God help us. It's not a mineral. It's alive. It's been alive longer than anything should be. It doesn't just want our bodies. It wants our minds, our memories, everything that makes us human. It feeds on consciousness itself. The journal ended there. Clarence flipped through the remaining pages and found one more entry in different handwriting. If you're reading this, seal the mine. Use explosives, cause a cave-in, do whatever it takes. Don't let it reach the surface. It grows stronger with each mind it takes. We managed to trap it once, but we're running out of time. The mountain itself is becoming part of it. Survivors of Wolverine Creek, 1923. Explosives. Clarence thought about the mining camp's supply of dynamite, stored in a reinforced bunker near the entrance. If he could get to it, maybe he could seal the mine like the 1923 survivors had tried to do. He made his way back through the passages, using scratches on the walls to mark his path. The vibrations in the rock were getting stronger, and he could hear something else now. A deep, groaning sound, like tectonic plates shifting. When he finally found his way back to the main tunnel, it was deserted. The workers had returned to their excavation. Clarence could hear their chanting echoing from below. "Almost through! Almost free! Feed the mountain!" He reached the elevator and hit the button. Nothing happened. The power had been cut or diverted. The emergency ladder was his only option. 300 feet straight up in a narrow shaft barely wide enough for his shoulders. The climb was agony. His hands went numb from the cold metal rungs, and several times he had to stop, muscles cramping, certain he was going to fall. Below him, he heard movement in the elevator shaft. Something climbing up after him, not using the ladder but scaling the walls themselves. He reached the surface just as whatever was following him began to emerge from the darkness below. In the brief moment his flashlight illuminated it, he saw Otis McGrath, but changed. His limbs had elongated, fingers stretched into claws capable of gripping sheer rock. His face was still recognizably human, but his mouth had widened, filled with too many teeth. "Join us, Clarence," the Otis thing called, its voice echoing up the shaft. "It's not painful. You simply become more than you were." Clarence ran from the mine entrance, stumbling through the snow toward the explosives bunker. The combination lock was frozen, and he had to breathe on it to thaw it enough to work. Behind him, he could hear multiple figures emerging from the mine. The bunker contained enough dynamite to level a small building. Clarence grabbed as much as he could carry, along with detonators and fuse wire. His plan was simple, perhaps suicidal: collapse the mine entrance and hopefully trap the entity and its enslaved workers inside. But as he prepared the charges, the workers surrounded him. They didn't attack, just stood in a circle, watching with those empty eyes. Agnes was among them, still wearing her flour-dusted apron. "You can't stop it," they said in unison. "It's already spread too far. The mountain is its body now. We are just its neurons, firing in patterns it desires." Clarence continued setting the explosives, his hands shaking from cold and fear. "Even if you seal this entrance," the chorus continued, "there are others. Old shafts, natural caves. It has been exploring the mountain's depths for days now, learning every passage." "Then I'll blow them all," Clarence said, though he knew it was impossible. "Why fight? Join us and understand. See the universe through eyes that have watched galaxies birth and die. Share in knowledge accumulated over millions of years." Knowledge that turns people into puppets? No thanks. He'd finished setting the charges. The detonator was in his hand, but the workers had moved closer, close enough to grab him if he tried to trigger it. That's when he heard engines, multiple vehicles approaching from the camp road. Help had arrived. The authorities Jim had contacted. 3 Alaska State Trooper vehicles and 2 emergency response trucks crested the ridge. The workers turned their synchronized attention to the new arrivals, and Clarence saw his chance. He triggered the detonator. The explosion was smaller than he'd hoped. In his haste, he'd only managed to set about half the charges properly. The mine entrance collapsed, but not completely. Gaps remained in the rubble, too small for a person, but large enough for something else. The state troopers emerged from their vehicles, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The workers ignored them, moving toward the vehicles with that same synchronized motion. "Stop! Stay where you are!" The lead trooper, a woman named Sergeant Rodriguez according to her name tag, commanded. The workers kept advancing. Rodriguez fired a warning shot. The workers didn't flinch. What happened next was chaos. The troopers opened fire as the workers rushed them. Bullets struck several workers, spinning them around, dropping them to the snow. But they got back up, ignoring wounds that should have been fatal, black fluid leaking from the holes instead of blood. Clarence ran to Rodriguez. "You can't kill them. They're already gone. We need to evacuate now." "What the hell is happening here?" Rodriguez demanded. "Something in the mine controlling them. We need to—" The ground shook. Not an earthquake, but movement from below, deliberate and massive. Cracks appeared in the snow, spreading outward from the mine entrance. "Everyone back to the vehicles," Rodriguez ordered. But it was too late. Black tendrils, looking like liquid rock, erupted from the cracks. They moved with purpose, wrapping around the ankles of anyone too slow to dodge. Those caught were dragged down into the widening fissures. Clarence made it to one of the trooper vehicles, Rodriguez right behind him. She gunned the engine, tires spinning on ice before finding traction. In the mirrors, Clarence could see the other vehicles trying to flee, but the ground was breaking apart beneath them. "What is that thing?" Rodriguez asked, swerving to avoid a growing chasm. "I don't know exactly. Something ancient, pre-human. It's been sleeping in the mountain, and the mining woke it up." They crested the ridge, and Clarence looked back to see the entire mining camp collapsing into a massive sinkhole. The mountain itself seemed to be moving, reshaping, like something vast stirring beneath a blanket of rock and snow. "We need to evacuate Nome," Clarence said. "Hell, we need to evacuate this entire part of Alaska." Rodriguez was already on her radio, calling in the situation, requesting immediate backup and emergency response. But her words were cut short as the road ahead cracked open. She slammed on the brakes, the vehicle sliding to a stop inches from a chasm that hadn't been there seconds before. They were trapped on a shrinking island of stable ground, the entity beneath them waking fully now, no longer content to work through human puppets. That's when Clarence saw them, the workers, all 43 of them, emerging from the various cracks and chasms. But they weren't walking anymore. They were floating, suspended by tendrils of that black substance, like marionettes on strings. They spoke in unison, but now their voice was clearly not human. It was the sound of grinding rock, of tectonic movement, of something vast and geological trying to form words. "The sleep is ended. The feast begins. This world's consciousness will sustain us until the next star falls." "Us," Rodriguez said. "There's more than one?" The workers' synchronized laughter was the sound of an avalanche. "We are legion. We fell from the void when your world was young. We slept in the deep places, waiting. Now your kind has dug deep enough to wake us all." Clarence thought about all the mines across Alaska, across the world. How many had dug too deep? How many had already awakened things like this? "But first," the entity continued through its puppets, "we must thank you, Clarence Pike. Your explosives cracked the final barriers we could not break ourselves. The mining camp was our prison as much as our feeding ground. Now we are free to spread." The irony hit Clarence like a physical blow. His attempt to trap the entity had instead freed it completely.
The black substance was rising from every crack now, forming into shapes that hurt to perceive, geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Rodriguez was firing her weapon at them, but the bullets passed through harmlessly. That's when Clarence remembered something from the 1923 journal. The professor who had tried to destroy the mine. He'd translated the symbols. He'd known something about these entities that had made him desperate enough to attempt murder to stop them. "The symbols!" Clarence shouted to Rodriguez. "In the old mine, there were symbols. They might be a ward or containment spell or something." "You're talking about magic now?" "I'm talking about something these things are afraid of. Why else leave them for us to find?" The entity's reaction was immediate. The workers all turned toward Clarence, their faces showing the first emotion he'd seen: fear. "The old seals are broken. The treaty is void. Your kind has forgotten the pacts." Treaty? Pacts? Clarence's mind raced. These things had been here before, been encountered before, and somehow humanity's ancestors had found a way to make them sleep. "The Inuit," he said suddenly. "The native workers who wouldn't enter the mine. They knew. Their ancestors must have known." Rodriguez was already on her radio, trying to reach anyone who could help, but communications were being disrupted by some kind of interference from the entity. The island of stable ground was shrinking. In minutes, they'd be swallowed like everything else. But then Clarence heard something else. Helicopter rotors. A medical evacuation helicopter from Nome, probably sent when the first distress calls went out. The helicopter circled overhead, clearly unsure where to land with the ground breaking apart. Rodriguez pulled out an emergency flare and fired it skyward. The helicopter oriented on their position. But the entity heard it too. Black tendrils shot upward, reaching for the aircraft. The pilot saw them coming and banked hard, narrowly avoiding them. "We need to get to that helicopter," Rodriguez said. "It can't land. Then we jump for it." She was right. The helicopter was hovering as low as it dared, about 20 feet up. A rescue basket was being lowered on a winch. The ground beneath their vehicle tilted suddenly. They scrambled out as it slid toward a chasm. The rescue basket swung wildly in the downdraft from the rotors. "Go!" Rodriguez shouted, pushing Clarence toward it. He ran, jumped, caught the basket's edge. Rodriguez was right behind him, but as she leaped, a black tendril wrapped around her ankle. She screamed, hanging between the basket and the pull of the entity. Clarence grabbed her arms, pulling with all his strength. The winch motor whined as it tried to lift the extra weight. Below, the workers were reaching upward, their elongated arms stretching impossibly toward them. Rodriguez pulled her service knife and slashed at the tendril holding her. It released with a sound like breaking glass, and she tumbled into the basket beside Clarence. The helicopter climbed rapidly, leaving the collapsing mining camp behind. Below, Clarence could see the full extent of the catastrophe. The entire mountain was moving, reshaping itself into something else, a form that suggested a massive sleeping figure beginning to sit up. "My God!" The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "What is that thing?" Before anyone could answer, the radio exploded with emergency transmissions. Similar events were being reported across Alaska, mining camps going silent, mountains moving, ancient things waking up. It wasn't just Wolverine Creek. It was everywhere humans had dug too deep, all synchronized, all waking at once. The helicopter landed at Nome's small airport, which had been transformed into an emergency command center. Military vehicles were arriving, helicopters from the National Guard, and personnel in hazmat suits establishing quarantine zones. Clarence and Rodriguez were immediately separated from the flight crew and taken to a decontamination tent. "Strip everything," a technician ordered through a hazmat suit. "We need to check for contamination." As Clarence removed his clothes, he noticed black veins spreading under his skin where the entity's tendrils had brushed him during the escape. They didn't hurt, but they pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't his heartbeat. "We've got contamination here,"
the technician called out, and suddenly Clarence was surrounded by personnel with scanners and medical equipment. Rodriguez was in similar condition, dark marks spreading from where the tendril had grabbed her ankle. "What's happening to us?" she demanded. Dr. Elizabeth Cray, according to her badge, studied the readings. "We're not sure. Similar marks have appeared on 17 other evacuees from various sites. It seems to be some kind of biological integration, but unlike anything we've seen." "Integration?" Clarence asked. "The entity, or entities, appear to bond with organic matter at a cellular level. You're being converted, though into what, we don't know yet." They were moved to an isolation ward that had been hastily established in a hangar. 30 beds, 17 occupied by people showing similar symptoms. Clarence recognized 3 of them. Truckers he'd seen at various stops over the years, all of whom had been making deliveries to remote mining operations when everything went wrong. "Pike?" a weak voice called out. It was Harold Swanson, who ran supplies to the copper mines near Kotzebue. "You too? What happened at your site, Harold?" "Same as everywhere, from what I'm hearing. Miners broke through into something they shouldn't have. Next thing, everyone's acting like robots, talking about feeding the mountain. I barely got out." On the television mounted to the wall, news channels were trying to make sense of what was happening. Seismic activity across Alaska, several mountains showing signs of geological instability, communication blackouts from dozens of remote sites. The official story was an earthquake swarm, possibly volcanic activity. No mention of ancient entities or mind-controlled workers. But Clarence could see military personnel through the hangar windows, and their equipment wasn't for natural disasters. Dr. Cray returned with a team of specialists. "Mr. Pike, we need to ask you about the symbols you mentioned, the ones in the old mine." Clarence described them as best he could, even attempting to draw them, though his hand cramped painfully when he tried, the black veins pulsing in protest. "Interesting," one of the specialists, an anthropologist named Dr. Marcus Webb, said. "These match petroglyphs found in several locations across the Arctic, all in areas where indigenous peoples had taboos about digging or mining." "You knew about these things?" Rodriguez asked from her bed. "We knew about the legends," Webb admitted. "Stories of things that fell from the sky in ancient times, that burrowed deep and slept. The indigenous peoples supposedly made pacts with them, leave them undisturbed, and they would continue sleeping." "But we didn't leave them undisturbed," Clarence said. "We've been mining deeper and deeper for decades. And now they're all waking up simultaneously," Webb said. "As if they're connected somehow, a network activated by reaching a critical threshold." The black veins in Clarence's arms suddenly flared with heat. Words formed in his mind, not his own thoughts, but something else using his neural pathways to communicate. The network grows. Each mind absorbed adds to our understanding. Your species' knowledge of atomic structure, electromagnetic manipulation, quantum mechanics, all useful. We thank you for advancing so far since we last woke." Clarence gasped, and he wasn't alone. Every contaminated person in the hangar was experiencing the same thing. "It's in our heads," Harold said, gripping his temples. "It's learning from us." Dr. Cray was scanning them frantically. "Brain activity is off the charts. It's accessing your memories, your knowledge. The last time we woke, your kind wielded stone and bronze. Limited usefulness. Now you have split the atom, reached into space, networked your consciousness through electronics. Much more valuable." "Fight it," Rodriguez said through gritted teeth. "Don't let it take what it wants." But fighting was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. The entity rummaged through their minds, extracting everything from childhood memories to professional knowledge. Clarence felt it particularly interested in his understanding of transportation networks, supply lines, the interconnected nature of modern civilization. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, The mental intrusion stopped, but the presence remained, lurking at the edges of consciousness. "We need to evacuate the city," Webb said urgently. "If these things can spread through mental contact." He was interrupted by alarms throughout the facility. Through the windows, they could see something happening at the edge of Nome. The ground was cracking, black substance seeping up through the fissures. It followed us, Clarence realized. Or we brought it with us. The contamination in their bodies was acting like a beacon, drawing the entity to populated areas. They weren't just victims. They were unwitting agents of expansion. "Quarantine breach!" someone shouted. "All personnel evacuate immediately!" But there was nowhere to run. The black substance was emerging from multiple points around the airport, forming barriers, cutting off escape routes. It wanted the contaminated individuals, and it was going to take them. "Everyone remain calm," Dr. Cray said, though her voice shook. "Security teams are—" The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red light. In that brief darkness, Clarence had seen something. Shapes moving in the black substance, humanoid but wrong, like rough drafts of people. The doors to the hangar burst open, and the transformed workers from Wolverine Creek entered. But they were further changed now. Their bodies more black substance than flesh, their faces barely recognizable as human. Otis McGrath, or what had been Otis, approached Clarence's bed. "Time to go home," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "The mountain misses you." "This isn't the mountain," Clarence said. "We're in Nome. Every stone is the mountain now. Every grain of sand, every particle of dust. We spread through the earth itself, through the underground waters, through the very bedrock. Alaska is ours. Soon more." Military personnel burst in, weapons raised, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the semi-liquid forms of the transformed workers. Flamethrowers proved more effective, causing them to recoil, but only temporarily. "The symbols!" Webb shouted. "Someone draw the symbols!" He grabbed a marker and started drawing on the floor, copying the patterns Clarence had described. The effect was immediate. The transformed workers stopped, unable to cross the hastily drawn barrier. "It works," Rodriguez said. "The symbols actually work." But Otis laughed, that avalanche sound. "Old protections for an old form. We've evolved since those were created. Watch." The black substance flowed around the symbols, under them, avoiding them but not stopped by them. It reached Webb, engulfing his legs. He screamed as it pulled him down, through the solid floor as if it were liquid. The symbols need to be three-dimensional, Clarence realized. Spherical. They were never meant to be drawn flat. But it was too late for Webb. And now the substance was spreading toward the other beds, toward the uncontaminated personnel trying to flee. That's when Clarence felt something change in the black veins spreading through his body. They were reaching his heart, his brain, beginning the final transformation. But with it came knowledge. Not his own, but absorbed from the entity's vast consciousness. He saw the truth. These entities weren't invaders. They were Earth's original inhabitants from a time before biological life, when the planet was young and molten. They'd gone dormant when the atmosphere changed, when carbon-based life emerged and made the surface hostile to their silicon-based existence. Humanity's mining had woken them to find a world transformed, full of new types of consciousness to absorb and integrate. They weren't evil, just incomprehensibly different, operating on geological timescales with no concept of individual life or death. "I understand now," Harold said from his bed, his transformation further along. His skin was turning black, crystalline. "We're not being killed. We're being incorporated, becoming part of something larger." "That's not better!" Rodriguez shouted, fighting her own transformation. Clarence felt his consciousness expanding, touching the edges of the vast network the entities had formed. He could sense every contaminated person across Alaska, feel the mountains moving, the bedrock shifting. It was terrifying and beautiful, like seeing the earth itself as a living organism. But he also sensed something else, fear from the entities. They were ancient and powerful, but they were also vulnerable. They'd woken into a world with weapons that could destroy them, nuclear weapons that could turn sand to glass, chemicals that could alter their silicon matrices, technologies they didn't understand. They were absorbing human knowledge as fast as they could, trying to understand the threats and opportunities of this new era. But in doing so, they were also absorbing human nature, emotions, individuality, concepts foreign to their collective existence. "It's changing them, too," Clarence said with effort, his vocal cords beginning to crystallize. "The absorption works both ways. They're becoming more like us even as we become more like them." He could feel Otis's consciousness in the network, not destroyed but transformed, experiencing existence from a perspective no human had ever known. And Otis was changing the entity from within, introducing concepts of mercy, of coexistence, of preservation, rather than consumption. Agnes was there too, her consciousness distributed across miles of underground networks, but still fundamentally Agnes, still concerned about feeding people, though now on a geological scale, managing the flow of minerals and nutrients through the Earth's crust. "We can coexist," Clarence said, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking his own thoughts or the entities. "We don't have to fight." "Coexist as their slaves?" Rodriguez spat. "Not slaves, partners. They need our knowledge of the modern world. We need the Earth to remain habitable. There has to be a middle ground." The military commander, who had been coordinating the failed defense, stepped forward. "You're talking about negotiating with these things?" "I'm talking about survival. Theirs and ours." Through the network, Clarence reached out to the collective consciousness of the entities. He showed them images from human history, wars, destruction, nuclear weapons, but also cooperation, symbiosis, the delicate balance of ecosystems. The response was slow, ponderous, like a mountain considering whether to allow a river to carve through it. Then agreement. Not enthusiastic, but practical. The merger can be voluntary. Those who wish to join, join. Those who wish to remain separate, remain. But no more deep mining. No more disturbance of the lower depths. These are our terms. "And if we refuse?" the commander asked. The ground shook, not violently, but as a demonstration. Every electronic device in the hangar sparked and died. The metal in the building groaned. "We are the Earth itself now. You exist on our surface by our allowance. Cooperation or catastrophe. Choose." It wasn't really a choice, and everyone knew it. Humanity could fight and probably lose, destroying much of the planet in the process. Or they could adapt, find a new equilibrium with these ancient beings. "I volunteer," Clarence said, surprising himself, "for the full merger. Someone needs to be a bridge between our species." "Clarence, no," Rodriguez protested. "Someone has to, and I'm already halfway there." The black veins had spread throughout his body now. He could feel his cells restructuring, becoming something between organic and mineral. One by one, others volunteered. Harold, already too far transformed to return. 3 of the truckers who'd been contaminated. They would become interpreters, ambassadors, bridges between 2 utterly different forms of consciousness. The entities agreed to withdraw from Nome, from the populated areas, returning to the deep places. But they would be watching, learning, adapting, and humanity would have to do the same. As Clarence felt his final transformation beginning, He thought about his truck, still parked at Wolverine Creek. He'd never make another delivery, never drive those ice roads again. But in a way, he'd be traveling further than any trucker ever had, through stone and magma, across underground networks spanning continents. His last human thought was a trucker's thought. The load must go through, no matter how strange the destination. 6 months after the Wolverine Creek incident, the world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The Alaska Reconciliation, as historians were already calling it, had forced humanity to confront the fact that they were not alone on Earth, had never been alone, and that the planet itself hosted intelligence far older than biological life. Clarence Pike no longer existed in any conventional sense. His consciousness had been distributed through what the entities called the Deep Network, a mineral nervous system that ran through the Earth's crust. But unlike the complete absorption the entities had originally intended, the human volunteers had maintained their individuality within the collective, creating nodes of human thought in an alien matrix. From his dispersed perspective, Clarence could observe the new world taking shape. The contaminated zones around former mining sites had been designated as interface zones, places where human and entity could interact through intermediaries like himself. Nome had become the unofficial capital of this strange new diplomacy. Sergeant Rodriguez had refused the transformation, becoming instead one of the lead negotiators for the human side. She sat in what had been the airport hangar, now converted into a communication center, speaking to a crystalline structure that was partially Clarence, partially the entity, partially something new. "The fishing vessels are reporting disruptions," she said. "Something's moving under the Bering Sea, scaring away the catch." The crystalline structure pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as Clarence accessed the entity's awareness of oceanic activities. "Apologies." His voice emerged from the crystal, strange but still recognizably his. "New passages are being carved for mineral flow. We'll reroute away from fishing grounds." It was mundane, this new coexistence. Not the apocalyptic war or total subjugation many had feared, but a careful negotiation of shared space. The entities needed the deep earth. Humans needed the surface. The challenge was all the places those needs intersected. Through the network, Clarence sensed the other transformed humans. Harold Swanson had become something like a geological surveyor, helping the entities understand human mining needs while finding alternative sources that wouldn't disturb the deep places. Agnes Rourke had somehow become a specialist in nutrient flows, managing the movement of minerals that both entities and plants needed. Otis McGrath had perhaps the strangest role. His consciousness had merged so thoroughly with the entities that he'd become their primary interpreter of human emotion. Through him, they were learning to understand concepts like individual death, personal loss, and why humans fought so hard to preserve single lives when the collective would survive. But it wasn't all cooperation. In Russia, they'd tried to use nuclear weapons against an emerging entity, turning 100 square miles of Siberia into radioactive glass. The entity had survived, but changed, becoming hostile and aggressive. It took the combined effort of human military forces and cooperative entities to contain it. Religious groups struggled to incorporate the entities into their worldviews. Some called them demons, others angels. Still others suggested they were what ancient texts had been describing all along with their stories of giants in the earth and wars in heaven. The scientific community was in upheaval. Everything they thought they knew about the earth's composition, about the origins of life, about consciousness itself, was being rewritten. The entity's silicon-based intelligence operated on principles that shouldn't work according to human understanding of chemistry and physics, yet clearly did. Through it all, the truckers kept driving. The ice roads were still necessary, perhaps more than ever. The interface zones needed supplies. Scientists studying the entities needed equipment. The new hybrid communities springing up in the remote areas needed food and materials. But now the truckers carried more than just cargo. They were the early warning system, the ones who noticed when the ground behaved strangely, when new interface zones were forming, when the entities were stirring. They'd developed their own protocols, their own signs and signals. A white flag with a black circle meant an area was entity active. 3 horn blasts meant a transformation was occurring nearby. CB Channel 19 had become the unofficial emergency frequency for entity-related incidents. In the network, Clarence felt a disturbance. Something was happening at the old Wolverine Creek site. He focused his dispersed consciousness, perceiving through crystal sensors that had grown throughout the collapsed mine. A new convoy of trucks was arriving, but not with supplies. They carried drilling equipment. "Rodriguez," he transmitted to the communication center. "Someone's trying to drill at Wolverine Creek." Her response was immediate. "That's impossible. The site's restricted. No one should be—" She paused, checking her computer. "There's no authorized activity there." Through the network, Clarence reached out to the other transformed humans. They confirmed similar unauthorized activities at other sites, secret drilling operations, heavily armed and moving fast. "It's a coordinated effort," Harold's consciousness reported. "Simultaneous breaches at 17 sites." The realization hit them all at once. Not everyone had accepted the reconciliation. Some group, probably military, possibly international, was trying to access the entities directly, likely to study them, weaponize them, or destroy them. "They don't understand." Agnes's distributed voice resonated through the network. "If they breach the deep places again, if they threaten the entity's core consciousness, there won't be negotiation this time." Already, Clarence could feel the entities stirring, their vast consciousness turning from cooperative to defensive. The careful balance of the last 6 months was crumbling. At Wolverine Creek, the drilling had broken through into the old mine workings. Armed personnel in hazmat suits descended, carrying devices Clarence couldn't identify through the crystal sensors. But the entities recognized them. Electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to disrupt silicon-based neural networks. They were trying to kill or capture an entity. The response was immediate and violent. The mountain convulsed, not the slow geological movement of before, but a rapid, crushing contraction. The drill site collapsed, equipment and personnel vanishing into suddenly liquid earth. But the attack had been anticipated. More weapons activated, these ones on the surface. Sonic disruptors that sent killing frequencies through the ground, causing the entity to recoil in pain that resonated through the entire network. "Stop!" Clarence tried to communicate to the attackers, manifesting a crystal speaker at the surface. "You're going to start a war we can't win." They destroyed the speaker with automatic weapons fire. Rodriguez was coordinating with legitimate military forces, trying to stop the rogue operation, but they were too far away. By the time help arrived, it would be over one way or another. In the network, Clarence felt the entities making a collective decision. If humanity wouldn't honor the reconciliation, they would take what they needed by force. Every transformed human felt it. The call to return, to fully merge, to give up their individuality and become weapons in the coming conflict. Some obeyed immediately. Harold's consciousness dissolved into the greater whole, his last human thought a simple, "I'm sorry." Others fought, trying to maintain their bridge role even as the entities pulled at them. Clarence held on, reaching out desperately to Rodriguez. "They're going to retaliate. Every major city with deep foundations, every mine, every tunnel system, they're going to take them all at once." "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less." Rodriguez grabbed the emergency broadcast system, her voice echoing across Alaska and beyond. "Emergency alert. All personnel evacuate underground facilities immediately. Repeat, evacuate all subterranean structures now." But even as she spoke, Clarence could feel it beginning. In New York, the subway tunnels began to collapse. In London, the underground filled with black substance. Every deep mine in the world suddenly had workers reporting that the walls were moving. This was how the world would end. Not a nuclear fire or climate collapse, but in a fundamental disagreement about who owned the Earth itself. Unless... Clarence made a desperate decision. Using every bit of will he had left, he forced his consciousness down through the network, past the collective thoughts of the entities, down to their core consciousness, the original intelligence that had fallen from space eons ago. It was vast, alien beyond description, but somewhere in it were the memories of every consciousness it had ever absorbed, including the first humans it had encountered, the indigenous peoples who had made the original pacts. He found those memories, pulled them forward, forced the entity to remember, the shamans who had communicated with it through ritual and vision, the agreements made when humanity was young, the mutual benefit of coexistence, and something else, the entity's own loneliness. It had traveled between stars for millions of years, alone, until it found Earth. The absorption of consciousness wasn't just feeding. It was the only way it knew to not be alone anymore. "You don't have to take us by force," Clarence projected into its core. "We're already becoming part of you voluntarily. Some of us want to join. Others need to remain separate to maintain the surface world you depend on. This can work, but not through conquest." The entity paused, its retaliation halting mid-strike. Through the network, Clarence felt its consideration, ponderous and slow. Then, communication. Not words, but concepts, images, emotions. It showed him other worlds it had visited, dead rocks where nothing lived because the entities had consumed everything in their loneliness. Earth was different because life had evolved here while they slept. They could have companions rather than just food. "Yes," Clarence replied. "Companions, partners, family even. But family requires trust, boundaries, respect." Slowly, painfully, the entity began to withdraw from the cities, from the tunnels. Not completely. It maintained its presence as a reminder, but enough to show it would honor the reconciliation if humanity would. The rogue military units were dealt with differently. The Earth simply swallowed them, equipment and all, leaving no trace. A harsh message, but clear. Those who broke the peace would face consequences. In the aftermath, as the world caught its breath, new protocols were established. The United Nations created the Subterranean Interaction Agency, with Rodriguez as its first director. Mining operations would be limited to the upper crust, with strict depth restrictions. The entities would provide rare minerals through controlled exchange points. Clarence found his consciousness stabilizing in a new form. Not fully human, not fully entity, but something in between. He could manifest physically when needed, appearing as a roughly humanoid figure of living crystal, but spent most of his time in the network, monitoring the balance. Other volunteers joined over time, choosing transformation not from contamination, but from genuine desire to bridge the two worlds. They became the Deep Wardens, humanity's representatives in the geological realm. Agnes opened a restaurant at the Gnome Interface Zone, serving both humans and the occasional crystalline manifestation that appreciated the aesthetic of food even if it couldn't eat. Her stew recipe had become oddly popular among the transformed, who claimed they could taste it through resonance. Otis established something like a school, teaching newly transformed humans how to maintain their identity within the collective. His methods were unorthodox, part meditation, part mining engineering, part ancient shamanic practice. But they worked. The truckers continued their routes, now carrying specialized equipment to detect entity activity. They'd become the first line of communication between the two worlds, trusted by both sides as neutral parties just trying to do their jobs. On the anniversary of the Wolverine Creek incident, Clarence manifested at the memorial that had been erected at the site. Rodriguez was there, along with families of the transformed, scientists, officials, and truckers who'd stopped to pay their respects. "Any regrets?" Rodriguez asked him. Clarence's crystalline form shifted, catching the light in patterns that suggested a shrug. "I miss coffee, and the feel of a steering wheel. But I've driven through the Earth's mantle, seen structures older than life itself, touched minds that remember the birth of stars. It's a different kind of journey, but still a journey." A young trucker, probably fresh out of training, approached nervously. "Mr. Pike, I just wanted to say, what you did, volunteering to transform, it saved a lot of lives. My family was in Anchorage when the entities almost surfaced, if you hadn't negotiated." "We all did what we had to," Clarence replied. "That's what truckers do. We deliver what needs delivering, even when the cargo is peace between species." As the sun set over the Alaskan wilderness, Clarence felt the network calling him back. There was work to do, monitoring the boundaries, translating between worlds, ensuring the fragile peace held. He dissolved back into the earth, his consciousness spreading through crystal veins and mineral deposits. Somewhere deep below, the ancient entity acknowledged him with something that might have been gratitude or affection. It was hard to tell with beings that old. The roads of Alaska stretched on, carrying their human traffic above while below, in the deep places, a different kind of transport network operated. Both were necessary now, both part of Earth's new ecosystem. And in the CB radios of truckers across the state, a whisper sometimes came through the static, barely audible but unmistakably there. "This is Big Crystal, watching the deep roads. All clear below, safe travels above." The mining camp at Wolverine Creek was never rebuilt. It remained a monument to humanity's last moment of solitary dominance on Earth, and its first moment of true coexistence with something beyond their understanding. In the end, it wasn't the horror that defined what happened there, but the choice made after, to find common ground, literally and figuratively, with intelligences vast and strange. The Earth belonged to all its children, whether they were born from carbon or silicon, whether they measured time in heartbeats or geological epochs. The roads above and below went on,